My name is Anne Gaspard, and it is my honor to be a moderator for this session focusing on combating hate crimes and ensuring effective protection against discrimination this morning. I work as Executive Director of Equinet, the European network of equality bodies, involving 42 national bodies from 32 European countries, all of them being OSCE participating states. Equality bodies, many being human rights defenders, are independent public institutions assisting victims of discrimination, monitoring and reporting on discrimination issues, and promoting equality in their country. They are established to combat discrimination according to European Union equality laws in relation to one, some, or all of the discrimination grounds covered by the legislation: gender, race and ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, religion or belief, or disability. And they act as independent national implementation bodies, translating, if you like, laws on paper into rights in practice, and seeking to make equality real and mainly accessible to victims of discrimination. Some of our members, human rights defenders, also fulfill a role as national human rights institutions and may deal directly with hate speech and hate crime, as well as discrimination issues. Equinet as a network provides a European platform for capacity building, training, and exchange of expertise between the countries and those bodies, as well as contributing their experience and establishing cooperation with stakeholders at European and international level. Therefore, I am particularly delighted to engage with the work of OSCE ODIHR and to continue doing so into the future on behalf of Equinet and to engage with all of you here today. So combating hate crime alongside ensuring effective protection against discrimination will be the topic and focus of our session this morning, which will continue into this afternoon and in a broader way tomorrow as well. Discrimination is a grave violation of human rights, affecting all fields of life and groups in society. In its more severe forms, it will serve as trigger for hate crimes. We have seen a general increase in hate incidents in recent period. This trend has been demonstrated in also figures of OSCE annual reporting on hate crime, and incidents of racism, institutional or other types of discrimination, and racial profiling have been reported to ODIHR, notably by people of African descent, and affecting every aspect of life for the communities in the OSCE region. Equal access to education, employment, healthcare, racial abuse, discriminatory practice such as ethnic profiling, and indeed cases of hate crime are all relevant issues. And this trend is particularly striking for various ethnic communities, but also increasingly visible on the ground of religion and belief, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. As stated in the OSCE commitment, we need a comprehensive approach to address hate crime. Prosecutors, police, lawmakers, educators, civil society organizations, human rights institutions have to work together to ensure effective data collection, prevention, law enforcement, prosecution, and protection of victims. So the aim of this session is to review the implementation of OSCE commitments related to the prevention of and the response to discrimination and hate crimes by examining challenges you may face, good practices, and lessons learned in this area. I hope we will have fruitful discussions and that these working sessions will also generate specific recommendations for consideration by ODIHR. Before introducing our speaker and introducer, I would like to remind you that the list of speakers is still open but is about to close, as we have a good numbers of listed speakers' requests. So if you would like to take the floor and contribute to the discussions, please sign up to the speakers list in the coming few minutes. As I understand, we will be closing it shortly at the back of the head table behind me. I would now like to turn to our speaker and introducer for this morning working session, I am very honored to introduce Mr. Hilary O'Shelton, who presently serves as the director of the Washington Bureau of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and as senior vice president for advocacy. Prior to that, he served in the position of federal liaison for UNCF. He was also working as the federal policy program director to the 8.5 million member United Methodist Churches Social Justice Advocacy Agency. Hilary serves on a number of national boards of directors, including the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the Center for Democratic Renewal, the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, and the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, amongst many others. We look forward to your introduction. Thank you for coming to join us here today in Warsaw, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by first thanking the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for inviting me to participate in the working session number 12, Combating Hate Crimes and Ensuring Effective Protection Against Discrimination. My name is Hilary Shelton, and I am the director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and senior vice president for policy and advocacy for the national NAACP. The NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is the United States' oldest, largest, and most widely recognized grassroots-based civil rights organization. We were founded in 1909, and even to this day, we stay true to our mission of fighting racism and racial bias in all forms. We currently have more than 2,200 membership units in all the 50 states of the U.S., as well as branches on military bases in Italy, Germany, Korea, and Japan. Sadly, racism and bias-driven discrimination still exists in the United States today, as it does in all too many places across the globe. Daily, we find ourselves faced with the challenges pertaining to combating hate crimes and actions driven by racism. One question we constantly grapple with is how we, as human beings across the globe, can combat racism and its devastating impact. One of our first tasks is to identify and define diversity among us. By this, I mean diversity based on race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, culture, and other distinctions. Equally, we must succinctly yet inclusively define racism and xenophobia, as well as define the problems which are driven by racism and other biases, including hate crimes, racial profiling, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, financial services redlining, and other forms of discrimination. These definitions must be known and understood not only by the perpetrators of problems, but also by the victims. We must have one standard definition of racial profiling, for example, so we can adequately train people not to use it in their lives and jobs, including law enforcement officers, and so we can teach people to speak up when they are a victim of this odious, onerous, and harmful treatment. We must be clear about what is unacceptable, detrimental, and what must be recognized in all as illegal behavior. As such, we must have a comprehensive, fair, and just system of enforcement against it. And we must not tolerate, condone, or in any way enact laws which work against an individual's race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, or culture. We've learned a few lessons along this fight for justice and equality for all that even become something akin to a prayer or even a religious mantra. That is, before we can address issues, in order to adequately manage the problem, we must first measure it. We must look at where diversity lives and where it is prominent. We must look at the problems which may result from any disrespect of that diversity, as well as some potential solutions. We must have adequate data collection so we can see who is engaging in positive, inclusive behavior, and also understand who is not, so we can focus on solutions. In some instances, the NAACP and our allies have found that it takes government actions to secure the data. And sometimes government involvement must be applied in the form of withholding or even the retraction of licenses, grants, or government contracts with private businesses that either will not keep adequate data or if the data demonstrates a clear pattern of blatant discrimination. We must be able to adequately assess the data in clear context so we know how we are doing and what must be done. In order to develop long-term effective solutions, we must be able to have adequate data which tells us not only where the diversity lives, but what impediments, if any, exist in any enclave of diversity to an equal protection and protected high quality of life we've been able to establish and that which we still struggle to achieve. We must be able to assess issues including access to living wage jobs and services such as high quality education, including public education, health care, and transportation, not to mention respectful, equally protective law enforcement. People need to be free to walk through their neighborhoods and communities, drive down a road, sit on their porch, operate a small business, or shop without being the victims of suspicion or intimidation. We need to have access to the tools of assess and disparities between our cultures, as well as tell us who is respectful to those differences and who is intolerant. It is in those latter categories who have become and are at the very least often perceived to be the oppressors. In any case, the effectiveness of law enforcement officers to serve and protect is undercut. Sadly, it is these oppressors who often turn to violence to maintain their dominance and control. Finally, we must develop a means for the victims of racial bias, whether it has been a hate crime or racial profiling by law enforcement, to pursue a private right of action in the form of legal redress against those who have opted to discriminate. We must pass and implement laws which instruct the courts, which have also been well educated on the definition of racial bias, as well as the damage it can cause to an individual or an entire community, to respond in support of the victim once racial bias has been proven, so that a fair, just, and community-affirming solution can be ordered. This will serve as a deterrent as well as an educational tool. If you discriminate, you are doing a disservice to yourself as well as to your victim, your community, and your country. In summation, any comprehensive strategy to combat racism and to ensure against discrimination must define, prohibit, and effectively measure racial bias. You can then use these tools and data to deter and defeat the effects of the racism and implement legally binding and enforced social constructs to prevent these acts from occurring in the future. And finally, you need to take proactive steps to ensure that those who persist in engaging in racism are punished and a remedy for the damage done is fairly and justly prescribed. Thank you again, esteemed members of this panel, for inviting me here today and for seeking out the views of the NAACP. I would just be delighted and deeply honored to engage in any questions or discussion you may very well like to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hilary, for this very concise, short, but very inspiring introduction to the topics of this session, reminding us of very important principles and highlighting the work of an important grassroots organization like yours in the US, fighting racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, the importance of a comprehensive, fair, and just framework with effective enforcement mechanisms and dissuasive sanctions, the need to measure and to effectively measure the importance of data collection, which, as we know, is also a priority of OSCE commitments and work. Without further ado, I will wish to open the floor to the discussion in accordance to the speakers list, which I now declare to be closed. We are very delighted to see the interest and the requests that have been made to contribute to this session. Before passing on the floor to the first on the request on the list, let me remind you of a few principles. I will appreciate if comments during this session are kept brief, to the point, and within the time allocated, which I will just communicate to you in a second. That also, if you have prepared written statements, there is an opportunity to submit those also to the documentation desk for distribution to all participants, so that they can be communicated widely after. And if your contribution contains specific recommendations addressed to participating states, ODIHR, OSCE institutions, other international organizations or NGOs. These are most welcome indeed, and we'll be grateful if you could start with these and use the remaining of your limited time to explain the context and the background of these recommendations. And finally, of course, criticism is very welcome, but should be constructive and, as far as possible, accompanied by specific recommendations. So we have so far, I don't know exactly the total of requests, but I think we have reached the almost 50 requests indeed, and it will be a maximum of 3 minutes for each intervention. So I will be very grateful for you to ensure that your speaking time does not exceed 3 minutes, and I will take the liberty to remind you of that if necessary. So, without further ado, I will first give the floor to Italy on behalf of the European Union, to be followed by Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairperson. I have the honor to take the floor on behalf of the European Union and of the following states: former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, San Marino, and Norway, and to report on the latest developments in combating hate crimes with the objective of ensuring effective protection against all forms of discrimination. To this end, the European Union recommends that participating states of the OSCE to increase efforts to strengthen the implementation of the OSCE Ministerial Council's decision number 9 of 2009 on combating hate crimes, boost the OSCE-wide fight against hate speech while fully respecting freedom of expression, including by using all opportunities offered by to publicly condemn and speak out against hate crimes regardless of pretext. Continue cooperating actively with the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights and to fully support its activities in preventing hate crimes. Submit available and relevant data to ODIHR for its annual report on hate crimes in the OSCE region. These recommendations are a reflection of the high value that the European Union attaches to the work carried out by the ODIHR in preventing hate crimes across the OSCE region, the value of which the EU is founded include respect for human dignity, equality, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. Moreover, strong union legislation exists in the field of racism and xenophobia. The Council Framework Decision of 2008 on combating certain forms of and expressions of racism and xenophobia by means of criminal law, the Anti-Discrimination Directives of 2000, the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, which prohibits content inciting to hate on grounds of race, sex, religion, and nationality or nationality in all audiovisual media services, and the so-called Victims Directive, which establishes minimum standards on the rights, support, and protection of crimes victims. Discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and disability is also prohibited, including through the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Nevertheless, the EU and its member states have recognized the urgency to raise awareness about the need to fight hate crimes also by expanding the scope of their official data collection in order to make sure such a crime more visible in the EU and to increase efforts to hold the perpetrators accountable. Consequently, the Justice and Home Affairs Council of December 2013 agreed on the Council conclusions on combating hate crimes in the EU. In particular, the Council of the EU invited member states to ensure the framework decision of November 2008 on combating certain forms of and expression of racism and xenophobia by means of criminal law has been fully transposed into national legislation and implemented in practice. Consider the experience of other member states in extending within their criminal legislation the scope of punishable hate crimes offences and the inclusion of other bias motives behind these offences. ensure a prompt and effective investigation and prosecution of hate crimes, collect and publish comprehensive and comparable data on hate crimes, ensure that victims of hate crimes are assisted, supported, and protected. As a result of this conclusion, the EU Fundamental Rights Agency established a working party on improving recording of hate crimes. The working party brings together Member States, the European Commission, the Council of Europe's Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, and the ODIHR. Well, the test has been distributed to the documentation center. I'm sorry, it was quite long, but it is on behalf of 28 states plus supporters. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We fully appreciate that this conveys the views of many, and indeed, I think we very welcome the very specific list of recommendations that you have shared, and indeed, very useful to circulate these electronically to make sure they are duly considered by ODIHR in the follow-up to this meeting. Thanks for reminding these of the context of also some of the EU legislation framework and the connection to the work of ODIHR. I will now pass on the floor to Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, to be followed then by the Core Issues Trust, and I would ask you to kindly respect the 3 minutes time.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahmad Shahidov. I represent Azerbaijan. Also, I represent Azerbaijan. I would like to talk about another society whose rights are violated. As human rights advocate, we are obliged to support human rights wherever we are. Today, I want to talk about the human rights in Cyprus Island. There are 2 de facto countries in Cyprus. One of them is the Republic of Cyprus. I'm in Greek Cyprus. We have the country's representative here. Another country is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which was built by Turks who lived in the island. If we make comparison between the 2 countries, we observe the rights of Turks in Cyprus are violated. However, these 2 nations had joined country in 1960. The reason of collapse of this joint state is Greek side, I think. As time passed on, Greeks forced Turks to leave the island, and today they announce themselves as the only owner of the Cyprus. I would like to address to the representative of Republic of Cyprus. Do you represent Girne, Lefke, Magusa cities as well? Do you represent Turks who live in the island? If so, why do you violate their rights? The things I observed in Cyprus terrified me indeed. Turks who live in the island are restricted to use their rights of freedom of movement. Hundreds of people live in a blockade in their own country and cannot travel abroad. As sportsmen, scientists, and scholars of Cyprus, Turks cannot demonstrate his talent in an international level. The reason is that the country they live in face sanctions. Today, the negotiations are underway of annexation of the island, and we support these negotiations. However, we observe non-constructive stance of Greek side. When I was in the island, I learned that Greek government handed out hunting weapons to its citizens, and Greeks threatened Turks with these weapons by forcing them to leave their homes. I think this is not peaceful negotiations. I have studied Cyprus history and reached such a conclusion that Greeks have never interested in annexation of the island and it's becoming one country. The referendum on Kofi Annan's plan for the reunification of Cyprus, which held in 2004, once again proved this. Also, Turks in the island said yes to the plan. Greeks said no. Greece wants to be only owner of the island, which conducts all international laws. Just imagine over the centuries, 2 nations used to live together, Turks and Greeks. As time passed on, Greeks want to force Turks in the island by the support of Greece and other European countries. Turks who resisted and tried to support their rights, which led to break of war. Thousands of people lost their lives. Even today we come across ditch where Turks were buried in Cyprus. Who will be responsible for this? I would like to address to the representatives who represent themselves at the Republic of Cyprus here. You do not join these discussions before. Maybe you answer my questions. Why create obstacles to the negotiation of the annexions of the island? How you will justify killings of people during all this time? In conclusion, let me address to the attendees here. Here, human rights, especially in Ukraine, it would be appropriate if you make time and visit Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, interact with ordinary people. You will see how thousands of people became strangers in their own country, how they face sanctions in their own country. then you will remember what are indeed the human rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I will now pass on the floor to the core issues trust, to be followed by the United States of America.
Chairman and members of the OSCE, thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. My concern is how evidence, rights, freedoms, and conscience are trampled through viewpoint discrimination under the UK's aggressive secular state. Our requests are the following. We request the OSCE to note the rising intolerance of liberal orthodoxy among politicians in an increasingly intolerant UK state. Secondly, the uncensored propagation of hate speech terms such as bigot to denounce unpopular viewpoints about therapy for unwanted same-sex attractions. According to the media, reports of one project worker in London funded by the Home Office to prevent the government's counter-terrorism strategy says that belief in homosexuality is wrong may be a personal opinion, but if you speak it out loud, you might be breaking the law. Along with other socially conservative and faith groups in the United Kingdom, Core Issues Trust argues that it is valid to hold and express the view that homosexual practices may be changeable and that those formerly gay, no longer wishing to identify as gay or to practice homosexual behaviors, should be permitted access to professional support to help them change if they so request and where this is possible. A High Court judgment supporting our view that persons who were formerly gay should not be discriminated against found that discrimination against a person because of his or her past actual or perceived sexual orientation or because his or her sexual orientation has changed is discrimination because of sexual orientation. There is no requirement in the Equality Act that discrimination must relate to a person's current sexual orientation. All that is required is that the discrimination is because of sexual orientation. On the 17th of September, Lord Black of Brentwood said in the House of Lords, in support of Prime Minister David Cameron's strong opposition to such therapeutic interventions in the UK, that when you are dealing with bigots, I fear that words are not enough. Those groups motivated by orthodox Christian values with regard to human sexuality to help such people are not exempt from the effective ban that is now in place to hold this view in the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this contribution, widening also to aspects of discrimination on different grounds of discrimination. I will now pass on the floor to the United States of America, to be followed by Turkey.
Thank you, moderator, and my sincere thanks to Mr. Shelton for his very thoughtful and useful introduction this morning. In recent months, our nation has mourned the tragic murders of 9 African Americans during a church service in South Carolina. In August, a state jury convicted a man for killing 3 people who it turned out were Christians outside Jewish centers in Kansas last year. We also witnessed an increase in hate crimes against Muslims and others mistaken to be Muslims, such as Sikhs, in recent years. In response to these appalling crimes, President Obama and Americans of many faiths, races, and backgrounds and communities across the United States joined together to reaffirm that our diverse nation stands as one against hatred and intolerance. The U.S. Department of Justice continues to investigate hate crimes, provide support to families and communities affected by hate crimes, and collect and publicly report hate crimes data. We have drawn some lessons from our national experience and participate in numerous international exchanges of views. The U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism and the U.S. Special Representative to Muslim Communities have visited France, Denmark, and the UK and other countries following tragedies that were the result of anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. Troubling trends of intolerance, discrimination, and hate crimes continue across the OSCE region despite strong denunciations from some leaders. In France and elsewhere, anti-Semitic attacks continue, including the assault on a rabbi, numerous attacks on Jewish school children, and the vandalizing of Jewish graves and other property. The establishment of an anti-Semitism commission in Germany and increased security assurances in the United Kingdom, France, and Belgium, as well as efforts to engage civil society leaders in speaking out against anti-Semitism, can assist in the protection of Jewish communities. Acts of anti-Muslim bigotry have spiked in the wake of the terrorist attacks in Paris and elsewhere. In France, for example, mosques have been defaced, workplace discrimination has been widely reported, and 3/4 of anti-Muslim hate crimes are attacks on veiled women. We look forward to the EU's conference later this week in Brussels on preventing and combating anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred in Europe. We also welcome the sentencing of Russian ultranationalists such as Ilya Gorbachev, who was involved in the deaths of human rights defenders and 4 Russian citizens from the Caucasus. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons are subjected to discriminatory laws and practices across the OSCE region and are frequently the attacks of hate crimes. We are troubled by the Turkish authorities' decision this June to disperse by force a peaceful rally in support of the human rights of LGBTI persons. In previous years, this assembly has been permitted. In contrast, in Serbia last Sunday, we were pleased to see that law enforcement officers provided protection so the LGBTI Pride Parade could take place safely. In Kyrgyzstan, societal violence against LGBTI persons and organizations has increased over the past year, and we're concerned a draft of a so-called anti-LGBT propaganda law could move forward. And in Russia, so-called anti-LGBTI provisions create an environment conducive to discrimination and abuse against LGBTI persons. In a positive development in Kazakhstan, a constitutional council ruling found an anti-LGBTI propaganda provision and a child protection law unconstitutional. In closing, let me just say the United States strongly condemns all hate-motivated crimes, whether in our country or anywhere else, against our fellow human beings, and we support efforts to combat them. Such abhorrent crimes are an assault on the dignity and integrity of the human person that we pledged on the Helsinki Final Act to respect. Finally, the U.S. congratulates Lyudmila Alexeyeva, a hero of many of ours, and a relentless defender of human rights, for winning the 3rd Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive input, reminding us of the wide scope of hatred and intolerance. I will now pass on the floor to Turkey, to be followed by Giuseppe Dassetti, Observatory for Religious Tolerance and Freedom.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Turkey has long been at the forefront of efforts to promote tolerance and non-discrimination in the OSCE area. Yet it is regrettable indeed that the rise of racism, xenophobia, intolerance, and discrimination persists as one of the most formidable challenges facing our organization. Hate crimes are among the most serious manifestations of these phenomena. They pose a threat not only to the security of individuals, but also to social cohesion, and combating them rightly remains high on our agenda. Madam Moderator, I did have a number of, a wealth of information to share with you on the rules, laws that we have in Turkey to combat hate crimes, but in order to economize from time, I will skip them. You will find them in the written text, in the text to be distributed. So I will be skipping directly to this morning's side event, where ODIHR shared with us findings from its 2014 hate crime report. As the title of that event underlined, this should indeed serve as a wake-up call for all of us. Against the backdrop of increasing levels of Islamophobia in the OSCE region, we, for our part, and without being insensitive to similar crimes against other groups, attach particular importance to preventing and combating hate crimes against Muslims. In this connection, we reiterate our call on all participating states to acknowledge the threat of Islamophobia and take the necessary legal, administrative, and educational measures to combat manifestations of anti-Muslim sentiment, including hate crimes against Muslims. Considering the degree of underreporting of hate crimes against Muslims, we also believe participating states should step up their efforts in monitoring and reporting on hate crimes, including a more effective partnering with civil society as well as the collection of disaggregated data in order to shed more light on the extent of hostility towards Muslims. They should also develop community projects that aim to provide around-the-clock support to victims of anti-Muslim hate crimes. ODIHR, for its part, should continue and enhance its valuable work on educating Muslim communities about hate crimes. We remain firmly convinced that ODIHR should be provided with increased support and funding for its work. We also encourage the Office to further broaden the scope of its Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department beyond the already excellent work they are doing on this important issue. In conclusion, let me express our sincere hope that the continuing efforts of our organization in the vital field of tolerance and non-discrimination will one day result in an OSCE region free of prejudice, bigotry, and hate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this contribution. We will indeed also most welcome the full written statements, and including the range of recommendations that you have highlighted. I will now invite the Giuseppe Dassetti Observatory for Religious Tolerance and Freedom to be followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In the OSCE area, many persons and groups are subject to threats or acts of discrimination, hostility, or violence as a result of their racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, or religious identity. There are also other forms of intolerance, for example, on grounds of property or social origin, which are exacerbated by the ongoing global economic crisis. Moreover, there are people who suffer violations of their rights because of their disability. All these phenomena undoubtedly threaten the social cohesion inside each participating state, seriously affecting the group that is the victim. Some of them may also erode the confidence between states and trigger violence and conflict on a wider scale. In this respect, let me draw your attention to the fact that, according to the data presented this morning, crimes committed due to religious hatred are not only directed against people, but increasingly target places of worship, cemeteries, and other religious properties, whereas the right to maintain such places is explicitly guaranteed in international human rights instruments as part of the freedom of religion or belief. Moreover, social hostility against religious communities is pervasive in many participating states and is often centered on religious premises. The effects of this phenomenon cannot easily be overestimated. They may foster a climate of fear and intimidation, thus threatening existing religious pluralism and undermining peace and stability of the whole OSCE area. Therefore, in accordance with its virtue as a security organization, the OSCE and its participating states should develop a specific response to this phenomenon. In combating hate crimes, primary responsibility rests with the participating states. It is not satisfactory that they do not commit violence themselves, but they have a positive duty to protect individuals within their jurisdiction and punish the perpetrators. To this end, training on hate crimes for law enforcement agencies, such TACL program, for prosecutors, like PACT program, and for civil society plays an essential role. Moreover, participating states are required to do their best efforts in order to prevent the hate crimes from being committed through educative programs, awareness campaign, and so on. Finally, let me mention the importance of data collection in order to understand and address hate crimes. The website launched by the ODIHR is an important tool, but underreporting and underrecording undermine its effectiveness. Therefore, participating states have to improve their efforts on data collection through measures such as increased involvement of civil society, enhanced disaggregated data, and development of national action plan. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, including for those concrete suggestions and recommendations for OSCE and ODIHR. I will now pass on the floor to the Russian Federation, to be followed by Canada.
My name is Maxim Klepov, and I represent the Russian Ministry of Interior at this meeting. Madam Moderator, thank you very much for the given opportunity to exchange their different views and opinions on the existing problems in the area of combating the hate crimes and protection against their xenophobia. My speech will be focused on some aspects of this process, and it will be delivered in Russian.
Distinguished Madam Moderator, distinguished colleagues, unfortunately the problem of intolerance and hate crimes remain one of the most pressing in our world today. The policy of irresponsible interference by the United States and the European Union, interference in the internal affairs of other countries, has led to catastrophic consequences which the whole world must now overcome. The revolutions that have been sponsored or orchestrated in the countries of the Middle East and North Africa by them have led to the appearance of many of the hotbeds of tension, to the mass flight of civilians from these regions, and to the influx of thousands of refugees into Europe. This, in turn, has been accompanied by a sharp rise in intolerance in Europe and in aggressive behaviors. Among these are the tragic events in Ukraine, where hate crimes, the level of hate crimes against the Russian-speaking population, has taken on a dangerous scale. Ultranationalist neo-Nazi groups commit excesses. This is taking place before the eyes of the world with the full connivance of Kiev's main patrons, Washington and Brussels. Both the European Union and the United States continue to show their indifference to the growth of aggressive nationalism, racism, extremism, neo-Nazism, and related crimes, including in their own countries. We are especially concerned by the unproportional use of force by law enforcement authorities. The murders of Black Americans committed by American policemen in Ferguson, Baltimore, and Oklahoma, these are not isolated events. Human rights defenders note the direct link between police arbitrariness and the presence of racial prejudice. According to the U.S. media, specifically to the Washington Post, in the first 5 months of 2015, the number of Americans killed by firearms by police was 385 people. The share of dark-skinned persons who have been killed is immeasurably higher than their percentage of the population. The journalists have calculated that the probability of being killed by a policeman for black youth is 21 times greater than for white youth. Literally a few days ago in Delaware, a policeman killed an unarmed African-American person with disabilities who was in a wheelchair, shooting 10 bullets into him. We hope that the U.S. will work to implement recommendations in this area and the commitments taken in the framework of the Universal Periodic Review at the UN Council on Human Rights. Participating states of the OSCE must decisively condemn such practices and carry out in-depth investigations of all cases of intolerance.
The speech will be distributed to the documentation center. Thank you once more.
Thank you very much, including for distributing it to the documentation center. I will now pass on the floor to Canada, to be followed by Western Straits Minority University Graduates Association.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will deliver this statement in French and share some of Canada's own experience in tackling hate crime. En tant que pays qui...
As a country who sees diversity as a source of strength and innovation, Canada attaches great importance to combating hate crime and discrimination. Every year, we welcome more than 200,000 newcomers, roughly 85% of which will eventually become naturalized citizens. In 2011, Canada had a foreign-born population representing 20.6% of the total population. That is the highest proportion among G7 countries. Through our legal and policy framework, we seek to build an integrated and socially cohesive society. We do so by fostering intercultural understanding, civic memory and pride, respect for core democratic values, and by promoting equal opportunity for individuals of all origins. Canada has a strong legal and policy framework in place to combat discrimination. This framework includes protections and prohibitions in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, federal and provincial human rights statutes, the Criminal Code, and other legislation. Canada strongly condemns hate crime and is actively combating it through a combination of measures that include the application of our criminal law and related laws. We're also implementing special programs such as media education programs. In 2013, the police reported over 1,000 criminal incidents that were motivated by hate, 17% fewer incidents than in 2012. About half of these crimes were motivated by race or ethnicity, 25% were motivated by religion, and 16% were related to sexual orientation. This data can be further disaggregated, and it is fully available online. Moreover, Canada's National Standardized Data Collection on Hate-Motivated Crime Initiative promotes and increases standardized reporting and monitoring of hate crimes by Canada's police services. Its activities include supplemental data collection on hate crimes, police training to improve data consistency, verification to ensure the accuracy of data, and annual reporting of the data collected, as well as participation in national and international fora. We note that despite the efforts of ODIHR and many participating states, there are still some serious gaps in data collection activities. We encourage, Madam Chairperson, Canada is particularly concerned by the selective approach taken by some OC participating states. Even as they denounce racism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate, they fail to address violence and discrimination based on identity or sexual orientation. They also aggravate the risk of violence by creating differential treatment and access to services and subjecting people to laws that criminalize many aspects of LGBT life. And this is contrary to the spirit of OEC commitments on human rights, hate crime, tolerance, and non-discrimination. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup pour le partage de...
Thank you very much for sharing this practical experience and for talking about the challenges that remain. I will now give the floor to the Western Trace Minority University Graduates Association.
Center for Law and Justice.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Distinguished delegates, parallel to growing nationalist and extreme nationalist movements across Europe and the Balkans, racism and xenophobia has increased across Greece in recent years. For instance, Golden Dawn Party, which is known to be the ultranationalist and xenophobic, still stands as the third largest party in the Greek parliament. It's a political party that doesn't refrain from provocative actions and intimidations targeting members of the Turkish minority. From time to time, houses of worships that belong to the Turkish minority are attacked by extreme nationalist, Islamophobic, and racist groups. Unfortunately, perpetrators of these violent acts mostly remain unidentified, which also encourages others to continue their actions against the Turkish minority. As representatives of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace here, we would like to bring to your attention a few unpleasant incidents that recently took place in Western Thrace, Greece. The minority was deeply distressed to learn that a suspicious fire caused damage to the Mahmut Aga Mosque located in Komotini on April in 2005. Furthermore, in the same hours, the trees in the compound of the Alankuyu Masjid, located a few meters away from the Mahmut Aga Mosque, were cut down by unidentified persons. It's noteworthy that these events took place on a symbolically very important day for Muslims, the celebrations of the birth of Prophet Muhammad. Clearly all adding up to a multiple message of intolerance to the Turkish minority and contradict Greece's commitments to the OSCE texts. Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Associations calls upon the Greek state, first, to respect and promote basic principles of equality and non-discrimination across the country, treat members of the Turkish minority as equal citizens, and promote their ethnic, religious, linguistic, and cultural characteristics. Second, to trial those who are responsible for the hate-motivated attacks and crimes against the Turkish minority and its foundations. And finally, to start an objective, effective, result-oriented dialogue mechanism with representatives of the Turkish minority that aims to fight against any kind of actions based on discrimination, inequality, and intolerance towards Muslim and Turkish identities in Western race. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much for this contribution. I will now give the floor to the European Centre for Law and Justice, ECLJ, followed by SOVA, Centre for Information and Analysis.
The European Centre for Law and Justice would like to denounce the growing phenomenon of active disrespect and hatred against Christians in Europe. On one hand, Christian churches and graveyards are destroyed, covered with offensive graffiti, robbed, profanated, and desecrated, without being properly monitored, reported, and sanctioned by the authorities. In 2014, in France, around 150 such cases were identified, and they also happened in Italy, Spain, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Switzerland, and in a lesser extent in Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and Kosovo. On the other hand, Christian symbols such as representations of God and saints, the religious objects and clothes are used in the production of artistic works like advertising material, various exhibitions, posters, theater plays, and movies, not to serve their religious purpose or to contribute to a debate, but to insult, offend, and mock Christians and their religion. And after all, to tread on the values that founded our free society and our civilization. Those cases are hate speech covered up under an artistic and creative pretext. In 2014, in France, 49 cases of abuse of Christian symbols were reported. Similar expressions were noted in Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Germany. The history has demonstrated that repeated propagation of disrespect for a religion is the starting place for future violence against the religious community. Therefore, the European Centre for Law and Justice recommends to the participating states to monitor carefully such acts, to collect data with the specific aim at monitoring intolerance and discrimination against Christians, to take appropriate measures in response, and to follow up the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly resolution of July 2011. The ECLG also calls the OSCE ODIHR to report on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and recommend appropriate action to their member states, and to encourage governments to monitor the situation of Christians carefully and to collect segregated data on hate incidents and crimes, including vandalism against Christians. Finally, European Centre for Law and Justice encourages journalists and artists not to oppose or ridicule Christians and Christianity, but to defend Christian principles which founded our free society and which often clash with today's convictions of the masses. Thank you.
Thank you for this input. And as I mentioned, the discussions will also continue this afternoon on the topic of hate crime and protection from discrimination, and also into tomorrow, looking more specifically of aspects at religion and belief. So I will now pass on the floor to SOVA, the Center for Information and Analysis, to be followed by the Support Center for Victims of Hate Crime.
Distinguished Madam Moderator, distinguished participants, the problem of hate crimes in Russia remains extremely difficult, as in many OSCE countries. However, unfortunately, the scale of such crimes is unknown because information is not provided on this to society or to the police. And this is just one of the problems. There is a lack of a first registration or recording of such crimes. For this reason, in many cases, such hate crimes are not investigated. We have the impression that, in fact, if there is an investigation, it is not on the initiative of the police, but just those who are monitoring hate crimes. But this is obviously insufficient. We believe it is absolutely necessary to record such crimes at the very earliest stage. This is why we call for the protection of vulnerable minorities who turn to the police for protection. It is possible to provide an additional channel for such appeals, first through specialized government bodies, We have made such recommendations in the OSCE in the past. It is also true that non-government organizations helping these vulnerable groups can also play a role in contacting police and providing an additional channel of communication for potential victims. In the political and legislative sense, such crimes must be higher on the agenda, and the government should take additional commitments within the OSCE. So it's important to focus precisely on the investigation of such crimes and to have clear reporting. Otherwise, these crimes will continue to spread. In Russia, in fact, legislation is not always adhered to, and often there is insufficient investigation. We look at the situation in East Ukraine, where there are people from different countries taking part, most of whom, however, are from Russia and Ukraine. There are many ultra-nationalists and even directly nationalist and neo-Nazi groups. We believe that such groups of people must be monitored in order to stem hate crimes, and there should be a minimization of this threat by implementing commitments of the OSCE. And we also believe that any crimes based on motivations of racial hatred or ethnic hatred must be investigated. And this is certainly part of the commitments of the human dimension. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I will pass on the floor to the Support Center for Victims of Hate Crimes, to be followed by the Collectif contre l'Islamophobie en France.
Hello, thank you for the possibility to speak here. I'm representing support centers for victims of hate crimes in Germany. We run a project called Guidelines and Support Standards for Victims of Hate Crimes this year. We had 2 workshops in Berlin, and we invite around 30 participants from 70 different countries, also from Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia. And it was very interesting because we received more than 150 applications when we spread our call, which see that there is a huge need not only to talk about hate crime monitoring, but also to talk about the possibility how we can effectively support victims of hate crime. We believe, and we get the feedback also here with in the discussion with civil society actors, that the situation will become worse in the next years. Already in Germany, we see a rise of hate crimes, especially under the current situation that more and more refugees coming to Europe, and there's no common strategy how to integrate these people. And we also see a lot of hate speech, especially in social media. We have a lot of hate groups outside who not only talk, they act and heavily attack people, which is really a problem, and we need effective support strategies to help those people. Therefore, it's not, from our point of view, it's not enough only to monitor hate crimes like ODIHR did, and thank you to civil society approach like Facing Facts, who are doing a good job, and we know more about monitoring and hate crimes who are spread in Europe, but we need to build up a knowledge base how we can actively support victims of hate crimes. Therefore, we encourage you as a member state to build up independent support centers in your countries, and we encourage ODIHR and the OSCE not only to provide trainings for hate crime monitoring, but also to provide trainings how we can support victims of hate crime. We will have a side meeting today at 1 o'clock where we will present our findings from our workshop. So you are invited to come at 1 p.m., room number 3. Maybe we see you there, and we can a little bit deeper discuss this issue, how we can support victims of hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this contribution and concrete inputs from your experience in Germany, including recommendations to be considered by our colleagues. I will now pass on the floor to the Collectif contre l'Islamophobie en France, to be followed by the Institute of European Studies.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like, first of all, to thank ODIHR and the OSCE for its work in engaging civil society. Despite the recognition by the French President and Interior Minister of the phenomenon and term of Islamophobia, the executive in France, the executive branch, continues to refuse to recognize this concept and to use this term. The National Plan of Action to combat racism that has been undertaken by the French government would seem promising. However, the interministerial delegate for the fight against racism and anti-Semitism began his action by ranking racism and downplaying Islamophobic acts. In order to be credible in the fight against Islamophobia, France must create, in keeping with its OSCE commitments, a system for data collection that takes into account Islamophobia. In order to provide an example in this battle, there should be training provided on the respect of fundamental freedoms within the French government. In the first half of 2015, our organization recorded 152 cases of institutional discrimination against women. That's almost one per day, and 80% of these cases take place in the world of education. We see that 10 years after the law of 2004 was passed, there is a constant rise in the number of discrimination cases and a broadening of the scope of application of the law to encompass childminders. With respect to parents, accompanying parents in institutions up to a university, this wider scope of the law has led to arbitrary decisions such as the refusal to tend to veiled women in public hospitals or the exclusion of young women.
For the CCIF, Collective Against Islamophobia in France, first thanks to the ODIHR office for its remarkable work and support. According to data collected by the CCIF 6 months after the January attacks in Paris, anti-Muslim attacks rose by 23.5% in comparison to the same period last year. The attacks are again dominated by discriminations, but new kinds have been recorded, such as the dragging of primary school children to police stations, the destruction of mosques, and even the killing of people in total impunity. The structural nature of anti-Muslim discriminations have again been confirmed by our own studies and by academics such as the ones in Stanford and Paris La Sorbonne University. These discriminations are happening in schools and places of work, thus excluding Muslims from the rest of society. The CCIF welcomes the recognition of Islamophobia by President François Hollande and the will shown by Minister of Interior Bernard Cazeneuve to address the issue. But as reported by partner organizations in the OSCE region, there is a wide gap between public declarations and their execution on the field. We call upon OSCE and its member states to recognize Islamophobia and call for the implementation on reliable data mentioning Islamophobia as an aggravating factor of discriminations and hate crimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this shared input, putting the emphasis on the importance of addressing Islamophobia, again a topic that will continue into the day as well as tomorrow as well. I will now pass on the floor to the Institute of European Studies, followed by the Crimean Field Mission on Human Rights.
Добрый день, уважаемый председатель.
Ladies and gentlemen, the topic today, the fight against hate crimes and ensuring protection against discrimination, is very topical. But in order to fight against anything, you need to be able to document the facts and events that are at stake. There needs to be monitoring, and so there needs to be a structure to do this. And this monitoring needs to be of good quality and without any politicization. In democratic countries, civil society plays a key role for this, as do NGOs. And I represent a number of NGOs in Latvia engaged in monitoring in the field of ethnic and racial discrimination, as well as on the issues of Russian language learning and the freedoms of Russian-speaking population and stateless persons. Through my activities at the grassroots level, I have been harassed, and this harassment continues against me, carried out by the Latvian authorities, the police, the security services. My home was raided, and so on and so forth. I don't know whether or not I will be arrested when I return back to Riga, or if I will be arrested in the street at some point in the future, or whether I will just be done away with. Because I have received threats, and many rights activists face such threats and killings. Human rights activists in Latvia and as directors of NGOs who have carried out monitoring on criminality and killings in the field of discrimination and hate crimes are currently facing charges, and their security is jeopardized by the police in Latvia. I have to say that at this event here in the OSCE, the European Institute the Institute of European Studies has published a book called Harassment of Dissidents in the Baltic States, and we have brought it here. And I have to say that this book has not been fully published because no publishers agreed to publish it in Latvia. No one agreed to put their name to it because they feared the political persecution that would immediately ensue. And so I would call on the OSCE to monitor the activities of the special services in Latvia as regards human rights organizations active within their borders. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for sharing this experience on the grounds, including some of your personal experience. May I also remind civil society colleagues that there is a free civil society seat opposite me around the table, so when you are invited to take the floor, you are most welcome to use that seat. I will now invite the Crimean Field Mission on Human Rights, followed by the Legal Information Center for Human Rights.
Добрый день, уважаемые.
Dear participants, my name is Olga Stripnik and I represent the Crimea Human Rights Group. And I would like to draw attention to the following. The occupation of Crimea by Russia has led to systematic human rights violations as well as hate crimes against people who were openly opposed and continue to be opposed to the illegal actions of the Russian Federation in Crimea. These people are, on a systematic basis, subjected to killings, torture, kidnappings, deprivation of liberty, and so on and so forth. Amongst these people are many civil activists, and at the start of the occupation in March and April last year, there were many civil society activists and Crimean Tatar activists who were arrested. They opposed Russia's actions in Crimea. They were often subjected to torture and imprisoned. Many of their fates remain unclear to this date. There was Rishat Akhmetov, who was abducted and beaten in March. A criminal case was opened with regard to this case, but the perpetrators were not brought to justice. The people who clearly committed the crime, and there is footage to show this, merely are involved as witnesses. On the 6th of April 2014, when the Russian Federation had already taken control of Crimea and there was no open confrontation, a Russian sergeant killed a mayor of the Ukrainian forces, Stanislav Karacheski. He was unarmed and he was persecuted by a number of Russian servicemen. He was shot twice and no one came to his aid. It is important to underline that the court decided that this was just a killing through the excessive measures used in arresting a criminal. The court did not recognize that this was murder by a group of people on grounds of hatred. This meant that Zaitsev, the perpetrator of the crime, received a minimal sentence and the others involved escaped punishment altogether. Last year, many Crimean Tatar activists were kidnapped with the participation of the Crimean self-defense groups. The Kostenko case is a good example of the fact that spurious criminal charges are invented. He was tortured into refusing a lawyer and into testifying against other activists. We are particularly concerned by the fact that people living in Crimea, if they are victims of hate crimes, do not have any access to effective remedy because most often the investigation services, the legal proceedings and the courts themselves are intolerant towards people who are opposed to the occupation of Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this further contribution. I will now invite the Legal Information Center for Human Rights to be followed by Golos Svobody Public Foundation.
Good morning, Madam Chair, distinguished participants. I represent the Legal Information Center for Human Rights in Estonia, and I would like to draw your attention to the harsh treatment that is prevalent in Estonian prisons. Despite the fact that the prisons in Estonia are being brought into line with European standards, cases of racism, xenophobia, and other sorts of discrimination are still very common. And they tend to be targeted against people not of Estonian origin, who belong to ethnic minorities. According to official statistics, Russian and Russian-speaking people represent 2/3 of the prison population, whereas they represent 1/3 of Estonia's overall population. In April 2013, the LICHR provided its remarks on the Estonian compliance with the Convention Against Torture. There is the use in prisons of special security measures, which is unacceptable, and we also submitted comments regarding the use of Russian language in contacts with the prison administration and other measures. On 30th of March 2013, the UN Committee Against Torture adopted concluding remarks on Estonia, and it expressed concern about the tagging of inmates in relation to their level of Estonian language. The committee recommended that Estonia should put an end to discrimination against inmates on the basis of how well they spoke Estonian, and to ensure that they could have an impact on their own individual treatment programs. Torture in Estonia is punished by 4 years imprisonment, which we think is not commensurate with the gravity of the crime. Estonia should, according to the CAT, take measures to curtail harsh treatment in prisons and bring new prisons as well as old ones into line with European standards. A number of decisions regarding the unlawful use of excessive terms in isolation cells also were taken. These isolation cells and pepper sprays are often used against inmates in Estonian prisons. Prisoners should not be held in isolation cells for more than 400 days, and that's 9 months. We believe that this is tantamount to torture. International bodies and my organization issued a leaflet for Russian-speaking inmates and their families to help raise awareness about all these issues. Thank you.
Many thanks for sharing this experience. I now invite the Golos Svobody Public Foundation, followed by the Patrick Henry College.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. International norms and national legislation of the Kyrgyz Republic protecting human rights do not delineate the rights of users of injectable narcotics who are a group of the population that requires special protection of their rights. Their existence is forgotten. However, most limits on the rights of drug users are linked to discrimination. Drug addicts often experience overdoses of drugs, and this places their lives at risk. Due to negative views about drug addicts, medical staff often refuse to answer calls about overdoses. In so doing, they violate the right to life. Police patrols on the pretext of checking documents, often stop citizens and ask to see their documents. As is the case with many people, drug addicts do not have identifying documents on them much of the time, and police can then extort such people. Those who cannot pay are taken to the police station for identification. It's important to note that there is no legal requirement in Kyrgyz legislation to carry one's ID or a passport, and such people should not be held behind bars. In Kyrgyzstan, legislation provides for the arrest of drug users for possession or use of very small quantities of narcotics. When such people are arrested, their drug addiction can be used against them. Such persons are apprehended and manipulated in order to provide false confessions that can be likened to torture. These drug addicts are vulnerable targets for the extraction of false confessions to increase statistics of crimes solved by the police. Unfortunately, there are many such forced extractions of confessions that are used against a number of people. With respect to the medical profession, it is very difficult for them to operate under such conditions of acts by the law enforcement authorities. There is also a problem with ensuring the rights of parents to protect their children who are drug addicts, and providing assistance to this part of the population is often neglected. The rights of patients are also violated due to discrimination. So there is a need to provide more access to therapy and to amend legislation in order to recognize drug addiction as a factor that creates an extremely vulnerable group of the population. It's also necessary to ensure that drug addicts are protected against false criminal convictions due to their manipulation under existing legislation, and that any crimes that are committed when under the effect of drugs be investigated as such. Thank you.
Thank you for this further contribution. I will now pass on the floor to the Patrick Henry College, to be followed by the Collective Against Islamophobia in Belgium.
Good morning, and thank you for being allowed to participate today. My name is Stephen Baskerville. I'm Professor of Government at Patrick Henry College, but today I represent the Barnabas Fund UK. Numerous voices have said that OSCE participating states have a duty in addressing the current crisis in the Middle East and Europe to ensure the protection of human rights and dignity of migrants. However, Barnabas Fund would stress that this concern for human rights needs to go right back to the source situation of those fleeing for their lives from conflict and persecution, leaving homes and historic communities and heading for Europe. The problem is not just conflict and violence, but also the sectarian targeting of particular groups and especially minority religious groups. In the conflict between political groups and between Sunni and Shia, the fate of defenseless minorities should draw particular attention. Major groups, Sunni Arabs, Alawite, Shia Arabs, and Kurds, have significant areas they control in the region, plus economic, political, and military power, and significant outside support from regional and global powers. By contrast, Christians, Druze, Yazidi, and Shabak minorities have none of these, and no safe havens. European authorities need to recognize that among the vulnerable, these communities are particularly vulnerable and in need of support. For Middle Eastern Christians, it is bitterly ironic that 2015 marks the 100th anniversary of the peak of the Armenian and Assyrian genocides, which saw the killing of several million unarmed civilians and the elimination of vast sections of these ancient Christian communities. It was no more than truth when the United Nations Security Council cited genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes against minorities in its March 2015 debate on Syria. Likewise, the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide stated in June 2015 the UN's concern about intentional genocidal policies by Islamic State and other minorities, and others against minorities, especially Christians and Alawites. Therefore, we call upon European authorities to consider the provision of aid and support to Syrian and Iraqi minorities in just proportion to their numbers in the general population. This should be an explicit, verifiable policy. European states should likewise ensure that asylum for refugees is likewise provided with an explicit verifiable policy that vulnerable religious ethnic groups receive a fair quota of places. For example, just in passing the UK policy, for example, of taking in refugees from camps in the Middle East discriminates against Christians and other members of minorities who do not go to camps for fear of persecution from major population groups within these camps. In closing, I'd like to refer to the written version of my remarks, which contain notes and sources for materials on the fact that the decrease in the population of Christians in the Middle East and so forth. In closing, Barnabas Fund would like to pay tribute to the Polish government, whose provision of humanitarian visas has allowed phase 1 of our Operation Safe Havens program to bring 157 vulnerable Syrians out of danger to a new life in Europe. We pray that negotiations with other governments will lead to similar cooperative partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for reminding us of the importance of the human rights and dignity of migrants and minority religious group, and we will indeed welcome the full version of your written statements. Thank you. I will now pass on the floor to the Collectif Against Islamophobia in Belgium, to be followed by FEMISO.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Good morning, everyone. I am the Vice President of the Collective Against Islamophobia in Belgium. The recommendations that we would like to make at this meeting are, first of all, recognizing Islamophobia as a violation of human rights and as a threat to social cohesion. In Belgium, we've seen a sharp rise in Islamophobic acts. These acts are noted mostly by civil society organizations and recorded by them because the Ministry of the Interior does not have a register of such Islamophobic acts and transmit such a register to the OSCE as France and Austria do today. We also note the contribution made by ODIHR in the law against discrimination, which is being debated now in Belgium, and we are happy to see best practices shared with Belgium. We also demand today, Madam Chairperson, that faced with the influx of migrants and the difficulties experienced by European governments, that Islamophobia not be a substitute policy, that we not see our fellow citizens experiencing tensions due to this inflow of migrants. In Belgium, we have an inter-federal plan for combating Islamophobic violence and a national plan for social cohesion with respect to Rom Sinti, and we would like to see such a plan instituted for an effective fight against Islamophobia. A few figures for you. We issued a fact sheet on hate crimes in Belgium from between 2012 and 2014, and we have seen a 5-fold increase in such hate crimes. We note Nazi graffiti on mosques, and an increase in anti-Semitism. There have also been aggressions against Congolese women in the street. We also note the media discourse calling, in some cases, for murders of Muslims or calling for the burning or destruction of mosques. We do not see a proactive stance in Belgium, and we would like for the Ministry of the Interior to provide information in order to raise awareness among police and magistrates so that it to become more commonplace for people to complain when they are subjected to Islamophobia. Recently, we held an event in Belgium that led to a restrictive interpretation, unfortunately, that we noted on the part of the Belgian government with respect to religious practices such as sacrificial slaughtering of animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very factual contribution, sharing the experience in Belgium with a particular focus on the need to tackle Islamophobia, which again is a theme continuing throughout the theme of today and tomorrow. I will now pass on the floor to FEMISO, to be followed by Ukraine.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you, the OEC, for organizing this HDME meeting. Thank you to the OECD for organizing the training on hate crime these last 2 days. I'm Assia Ulkadi. I'm representing the Forum of European Muslim Youth and Student Organizations. I'm also coordinating the IMEN project, which is the Islamophobia Monitoring Action Network. It's a project that connects and builds cooperation of grassroots NGOs in order to report Islamophobic discrimination and support victims in 8 countries: UK, France, Belgium, Italy, Hungary, Sweden, Germany, and Netherlands. Indeed, the worrying trends of these last years, and especially this last month, are very impressive. According to an EU-wide research, 1 in 3 Muslims have experienced discrimination in the last year. In France, for instance, a report from the CCIF states that 78% of the victims are women, and in Belgium, the CCIB report states that an Islamophobic act occurs every 2 days. You had to know that Islamophobia impacts directly Muslim communities, but it also impacts people and persons who are perceived as such. For instance, Sikh people or persons with a migrant background have been reported being targeted by Islamophobic acts. Islamophobia is also targeting Muslims in education, in employment, and in social life. In order to counter these worrying trends, FEMISO urges EU institutions and member states to officially recognize Islamophobia and consider it as being an aggravating circumstances in hate crimes. We also ask member states to adopt national strategies to tackle and address discrimination faced by Muslims. We also call EU institutions to collect disaggregated data on gender, ethnicity, religion, and belief, with the aim to better implement anti-discrimination law, as well as shaping policy to undermine disadvantages faced by Muslims. We also act and call for the monitoring of hate speech in the political, media, and social media sphere. Indeed, in these 3 fields, this hate speech and Islamophobic speeches are fueling an environment that is fueling Islamophobic violence and discrimination. We also call for the empowerment and the financial support of NGOs in order for them to provide trainings on grassroots organization, on law enforcement bodies and professionals, as well as on victims themselves. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I remain available if you have further questions.
Thank you very much. I've been too quick in pressing the button. Thank you mainly for sharing, again, this experience, again, during the discussions to the issue of Islamophobia, but also pointing to experience of the recognizing the discriminatory nature of hate incident, hate crime as an aggravating circumstance, and the need for data collection and disaggregated data. I will now pass on the floor to Ukraine, followed by Jawab.
Спасибо. Добрый день, уважаемые участники.
Thank you, distinguished participants. I'd like to say that the Ukrainian delegation joins with the statement made by the EU and would like to speak in a national capacity. With respect to hate crimes and crimes based on intolerance, we must note that from the moment that the criminal code was adopted in Ukraine, such crimes have been examined under Article 162 of this code. And this establishes a responsibility for any such crimes, independent of the identity, racial, ethnic, religious, or otherwise, of the person committing the crime. We have been trying to create clearer guidelines for punishment of such crimes, and the committing of crimes based on religious or racial intolerance or discrimination has been more clearly defined. We have also widened the list of citizens to which this applies, and including such vulnerable categories as persons with disabilities. The human rights of all Ukrainian citizens are protected, and the changes that have been made to the criminal code also regard countering such crimes on the grounds that I have previously discussed. On 15th September 2015, we have 48 cases that are being examined, 48 cases of hate crimes. Now, with respect to the hate crimes that were mentioned by the Russian Federation, the investigative bodies of Ukraine are investigating a number of cases of murder and kidnapping and other hate crimes against Crimean Tatars based on intolerance. I cite the case of Shayan Rodanov and Zmuradinov, who were defending the interests of Ukrainians on the occupied peninsula. I'd also like to raise the issues of the cases of Savchenko, Afanasyev, Kachenko, and others. There are more than 200 cases of kidnapping of Ukrainian citizens that are being investigated. I'd also like to refer to the cases regarding members of the Mejlis, the Crimean Tatar parliament. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks for this contribution. I now invite the organization JAWAB, and to follow will be Article 19.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Rizwan Hussain, who obviously represents the organization called JAWAB, based in London, which seeks challenges on socio-political issues affecting young people from minority communities. As a part of JAWAB's work, we have been working with young people from across Europe, and predominantly in the UK, on the issue of racism, hate speech, and Islamophobia. Our work has come under constant barriers and struggles due to two main aspects. The first is there is no state-defined definition of Islamophobia. The official recognition of Islamophobia will help organizations lobby for change, but also help authorities to protect citizens from suffering faith-based hate crimes. The second being the preventing violent extremist agenda and how it's curtailing the basic civil rights of Muslims, and particularly Muslim youth. Whilst we appreciate it's the government's responsibility to protect citizens from terrorism, the current present policy lacks focus. The lack of targeting approach and lack of clarity has led to a deeper climate and Islamophobia, where anti-Islam rhetoric has been normalized in the mainstream and growth of Muslim youth has been curtailed. Counter-terrorism guidance has led to the entire Muslim population, which is diverse in itself in terms of ethnicity, sections, and practice, being viewed through the lens of a terror and radicalization. It has become especially apparent in the recent questionings of pupils and university students when they share opinions or engage in debates and learning environments. We're asking the state to work with genuine grassroots organizations like ourselves in order to create an authentic and representative definition of Islamophobia. The Muslim community, especially youth, should not be treated as suspects, as a suspect community. This only further stigmatizes and alienates them, which is not the right way, as well we want the betterment of the society as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing this experience. I will now pass on the floor to Article 19. And next will be LGBT Association, Liga.
Good morning. The ability to freely express yourself and who you are, whether that's in terms of your race, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, or otherwise, without fear of retribution in the form of verbal abuse, physical violence, or even judicial persecution, is key to achieving the inherent dignity and equality of every individual as understood as the foundational axiom of international human rights. Across the OSCE region, states are failing to create conditions to uphold the principle, as affirmed in the 1990 Copenhagen document, that all persons are equal before the law and are entitled, without any discrimination, to the equal protection of the law. Discrimination, hate speech, and hate-motivated crimes persist across the region and in some states are growing ever more prevalent. In some cases, such discrimination is either directly propagated by the state or indirectly fostered through regressive legislation that engenders a hostile environment towards certain minority groups. States must initiate clear measures and steps to ensure that discrimination on any grounds is made unacceptable in our societies. However, policy and laws need to respond to a double challenge, guaranteeing freedom of expression on the one hand, while also finding ways to promote tolerance by including combating incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. Article 19 strongly believes that there is no contradiction in this, and that freedom of expression combined with strong anti-discrimination laws, education, and training policies is the best way to challenge intolerance. Article 19 is particularly concerned by the growth in hate crime targeting LGBTI people in the OSCE region. While we have witnessed some positive developments in the legal and political environment to combat verbal and physical violence towards people motivated by sexual orientation and gender identity, LGBTI people are increasingly under attack in some OSCE countries. Legislation restricting the freedom of expression of LGBTI people, such as bans on so-called homosexual or non-traditional relationships propaganda, not only undermines the basic tenet that everyone is born free and equal, but can also be seen to breed intolerance, be utilized to justify discrimination, and embolden those perpetrating hate crimes to believe they can do so without impunity. We call on the OSCE to strongly push back against the potential adoption of any such regressive legislation, most immediately in Kyrgyzstan, and call for its repeal in countries where it already exists, including Russia and Lithuania. In terms of tackling hate speech and hate crimes, Article 19 believes that all domestic prohibitions of incitement should include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected characteristics. However, prohibitions that unnecessarily censor contentious viewpoints are often counterproductive to the aim of promoting equality and fail to address the underlying social roots of prejudice. Therefore, to combat hate crimes and ensure effective protection against discrimination requires much more than just the creation and implementation of international standards and domestic litigation and legislation. Tackling the roots of hate in all its forms is key in confronting this issue, and the OSCE would be well placed to promote a comprehensive institutional framework to effectively confront discrimination. This should go beyond focusing on specific manifestations of hatred and addressing discrimination against selected minorities. Instead, it should combat discrimination on any and all grounds and embrace all vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the work of Article 19, including reminding us of some of the key principles of OSCE commitments, and expressing also your concern for hate crime targeting particularly LGBTI people and related recommendations that you formulated in this respect. That leads us in a logic way then to the intervention contribution of LGBT Association Liga, and next will be the International Human Rights Movement, World Without Nazism.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The statement is made on behalf of CUC Netherlands, LGBT Association Liga, Ukraine, and Almaty Q, Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative. Of great concern are openly stated threats and violent acts committed by nationalist and far-right groups in 2015 and earlier towards people based on their actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. They have attacked or threatened to attack LGBT events in Ukraine, as well as attacked and tortured LGBT community in Kazakhstan. In Ukraine, during Kyiv Pride 2015, a radical group attacked members of LGBT community and human rights defenders who participated in the public march. Participants and police workers were injured. Guests and participants of the Odessa Pride 2015 have suffered from smoke bombs and explosive devices at a closed event. Also, in Mykolaiv, the nationalist organization Right Sector has threatened LGBT Association Liga before a public action. When it was held, they blocked people in the building where Liga held activities of the Equality and Pride Days human rights event. The Kazakhstani parliament plans to adopt a so-called prohibition of homosexualism propaganda law based on similar one adopted in the Russian Federation. If passed, it will make human rights and HIV/STI prevention work among LGBT impossible. Hate crimes against LGBT people are still committed in both Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Both of the countries don't have hate crimes legislation. Thus, in Ust-Kamenogorsk, Kazakhstan, neo-Nazi group Occupy Pedophilae attacks and tortures gay men, covering their activity with, so to speak, punishing pedophiles. In 2013, a couple of homosexual women have been unofficially married in Kazakhstan, and they widely publicized the event. A year later, one of the women was murdered. Ultimately, the victim's partner and 2 other women were found guilty of her murder. In 2015, 2 men killed a gay man because he drank alcohol with them from the same glass. Actions of Occupy Pedophilae and the murder of the gay man were considered as hooliganism, not a hate crime. LGBT people are still afraid to report such crimes and incidents to police because of their prejudiced behavior and previous cases of blackmailing and extortion by police workers. We call upon the OSCE participating states to use their influence and recommend the governments of Ukraine and Kazakhstan to: first, ensure protection of citizens from discrimination based on their sexual orientation and gender identity by including these grounds in the legal framework. Second, ensure prohibition of discrimination of LGBT people by including sexual orientation and gender identity into the Constitution of Ukraine. Third, ensure exhaustive list of grounds for protection from and investigating hate crimes, including those committed with homophobic and transphobic motives. And the last one, include civil society organizations working for human rights protection of LGBT people into the lawmaking processes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and for sharing those sets of concrete recommendations, which again will be taken on board and considered in the follow-up to this session. I now invite the International Human Rights Movement, World Without Nazism, and next will be Sandy Zan. The speaker is not there. We'll call just once again the International Human Rights Movement, World Without Nazism. If not here, I will pass on the floor to the next. And I understand this will be moved down to the list in case available later. So I now invite, therefore, the intervention of the organization Zandizan.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday, our Georgian colleagues said that in South Ossetia, citizens of Georgian nationality face discrimination.
Currently, Georgian schools function in the Republic, and a number of Georgians work in law enforcement and government. There has been no fact of discrimination based on ethnic identity in South Ossetia, and no complaints to international observers. It was stated also that South Ossetian authorities obstruct activities of international organizations in the Republic, and that the South Ossetian authorities cannot control the situation or investigate cases of discrimination. Now, today, South Ossetia needs nothing from Georgia. What I mean is that we have achieved total independence from Georgia, not only political independence. The only interest that South Ossetia has in Georgia is that we are linked by the need for Georgia to release Ossetian prisoners from their jails. I believe that Georgians understand this because they have been doing everything to keep those prisoners. Now, Georgia has done everything possible in order to cut South Ossetia off from itself and has carried out a blockade against our republic. What is more, today the Ukrainian authorities are making the same mistake with the Donbass. On the contrary, Georgia today receives resources from South Ossetia, including drinking water and water for agricultural needs. Now, Georgia is interested today in ensuring that South Ossetia works with international organizations. But judging from the fact that Georgia is categorically against international organizations working in South Ossetia through its Russian representative offices, the leadership of South Ossetia understands this. Our only neighbor with whom we have diplomatic relations is Russia. Now, there is an excellent example of the obstacles that Georgia places in the way of South Ossetia. I would like to note that the International Committee of the Red Cross does manage to work very successfully in South Ossetia through its Russian representative offices, and it does not politicize its activities. Our Georgian colleagues have said that Georgians in South Ossetia are obstructing the receipt of medical aid in Georgia. With respect to the claims made yesterday of obstructing the access of patients to hospitals, we reject this statement. Thank you.
Thank you for this contribution. I will now invite the Citizens Movement PAX Europe to be followed by the Center for Security Policy. Citizen Movements PAX Europe. Are you ready to take up the floor? Yes, I can see some movement, so let you take your seat. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. In Orwell's 1984, the point was made that in the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 make 5. And you would have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make their claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it, not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. It was by being interrogated by the full force of the Orwellian state, with his job and his freedom put risibly at risk, that O'Brien turned to his affable interrogator and proclaimed that the true freedom was the freedom to say, freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 = 4. In 2013, at the OSCE side event here in Warsaw, we got principal advocates to acknowledge that Islamophobia had no definition at a time when the OSCE participating states were undertaking the initiative to criminalize Islamophobia as hate speech, as they are still doing to this day. In May 2015, at the OSCE event in Vienna, at a formal OSCE function, we got members of the event to say that facts known to be true can constitute hate speech, when suggesting that calling the Islamic State can constitute hate speech, even as it was acknowledged that the Islamic State self-identifies as the Islamic State. The hate crime, hate speech narrative is emerging as an attack on free speech that is an assault on the truth. The truth can never constitute hate speech. Whether through direct action or under coercive third-party color of authority, state control of speech is an Orwellian assault on the very definition of free speech. Properly understood, free speech needs to be defended from the state, not protected by it. Those that claim the authority to protect protected speech have the power to decide what is and is not to be protected. In the United States, the First Amendment did not give the state the power to protect speech. It was created to deny the state that power. Properly understood, free speech is the right inherent in the person, not a privilege granted by the state. The term hate crime is emerging as one of those Orwellian terms that masks the mailed fist of the state to determine what is and is not to be deemed protected speech, another term that is increasingly taking on Orwellian proportions. As contrasted with what is to be designated as not protected and hence identified as hate speech. Orwell got it right. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. The Center for Security Policy recommends that the OSCE and all participating states not make Orwell a prophet, but instead rethink the suppression of thought through the unbridled assault on its expression through the thinly veiled hate speech narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And for this input as well as recommendation, can I just ask you to confirm that, as you just said, you were speaking for the Center for Security Policy. So I will therefore now give us the floor to the request brought by Citizens Movement PAX Europe that was listed.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, What we are witnessing today is the implementation of ever more restrictions on our freedom to speak our mind. We should not be addressing hate speech here in this forum, but free speech. Who among the participating states back in the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War, with freedom and communist oppression opposing each other, would have dreamed that we would one day be attending OSCE meetings discussing their speech restrictions? Who among the participating states back in the 1980s would have dreamed that one day we would have to tell our children to hold back their opinions in school for fear of repercussion? Who among the participating states back in the 1980s would have dreamed that one day we would be confronted with legislation governing thought crimes? And who among the participating states back in the 1980s, fighting for the forces of freedom, that is, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, against the forces of darkness, could have seen this sad day come? You, the participating states of the OSCE, were once instrumental in tearing down the walls of oppression, leading the way to freedom, the freedom to speak, leading the way to the freedom to speak one's mind openly and without the fear of repercussion. You have failed. By even discussing so-called hate crimes, which are nothing else than the destruction of the free marketplace of ideas, the OSCE has returned to the dark ages of oppression. Will we sit here in the coming years discussing whatever has been allowed by the OSCE participating states? How much farther will the corridor of what is acceptable speech be narrowed? Pax Europa calls on the OSCE to tear down the walls of tyranny of thought crimes. Only a free marketplace of ideas guarantees vibrant societies. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution and reminding of the underlining founding values of the work of OSCE, including freedom of thought, speech, and expression. I will now give the floor to the OSCE mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to be followed by Armenia.
Thank you. Hate crimes as manifestations of intolerance and prejudice undermine the human rights of individuals and threaten the basic fabric and cohesion of society. Seeing that hate-motivated incidents and crimes send a message to entire communities, and not only to the victim, they can be particularly destabilizing in countries where tensions between ethnic, religious, or minority groups already exist. Consequently, hate crimes may carry the seeds of potential wider conflict. Missions involvement. In order to assist local stakeholders in combating hate crimes and promoting community cohesion, the mission supports 19 coalitions against hate across BIH, involving some 120 NGOs. Monitoring and awareness-raising tools have also been developed to track incidents and responses. The mission has also trained members of the police and judiciary on hate crimes processing. Finally, the mission has advocated for harmonized legislative hate crimes treatment at state and entity levels. Discrimination. Discriminatory practices that affect disadvantaged and marginalized groups, including returnees, national minorities, and women, remain an obstacle to reconciliation in mission's area of responsibility. The mission is following an ongoing process of amending the law on prohibition of discrimination and is investing efforts in improving its implementation. The focus is placed on capacity building in key institutions such as the BIH Ministry for Human Rights and Refugees, the BIH Ombudsman Institution, and the judiciary, especially in regards to the data collection and invocation of this law in courts. In partnership with Centers for Training of Judges and Prosecutors, tailored trainings are designed and offered to judges, civil society, and law students. In addition to thorough human rights monitoring conducted throughout the country, the mission works to raise awareness of above-named law among civil society organizations and general public. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much and for sharing this experience and contribution from the OSCE mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will now pass on the floor to Armenia, followed by the National Forum Ossetia Accuses.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Many thanks to the distinguished speaker for his presentation. Following your advice, I will start from concrete recommendations and then present the background. OSCE participating states should extend political support to the NGOs or journalists, human rights defenders, and other representatives of civil society advocating mutual understanding, peace, reconciliation. The role of civil society should mainstream in its work monitoring of hate crimes, discriminatory and biased public discourse, with special focus on public figures. The OSCE participating states should promote independent media and freedom of expression as effective tools to combat hate crimes. In doing so, they should make effective use of OSCE institutions and field operations. Cases of harassment, intimidation, and oppression of civil society representatives who are advocating tolerance and non-discrimination should be effectively addressed by the law enforcement agencies of participating states. Such cases should be effectively monitored by the OSCE institutions and field operations. And a specific recommendation to ODIHR, it should address the issue of underreporting of hate crimes by expanding the sources of its information. TND is a cornerstone of the OSCE human dimension, which is an important avenue of promoting human rights and fundamental freedoms. It has clear link to security, since manifestation of hatred can lead to serious crimes against humanity, ultimate form of which is genocide. Therefore, OSCE as a regional security organization is the right platform to address security issues emanating from racism and discrimination. In discussing countering hate crimes, we should address the link between hate speeches and hate crimes. When hate speeches are delivered by public figures, even leaders of states, they can serve as encouraging hatred towards a certain group of people and thus become a source of hate crime. There is clear link between violation of human rights and propaganda of war and hatred. The worse is the human rights record in a taken country, the more intense is manifestation of racism and hatred, scapegoating of certain national and religious groups as a way to consolidate society. We firmly believe that youth is especially vulnerable to propaganda of hatred, especially when it is coordinated at the level of state. Unfortunately, OSCE area is not immune from hate speeches, and our neighbors from the east are very well known by officially cultivating hate crime propaganda against my people in general. What encourages us is that the white part of the society in that country does not share the racist public discourse of its leadership. On the other hand, we are concerned by the policy of silencing of civil society in that country, who dare to raise their voices to advocate peace and reconciliation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this contribution, for focusing on recommendations, indeed, that will be heard and considered. I will now pass on the floor to National Forum Ossetia Accuses, followed by the Gaboy Minority Organization for Europe and North Europe.
Good morning, distinguished colleagues. I would like to comment yesterday's statement made by our Georgian colleagues, especially as it is related to discrimination. In particular, I would like to mention the fact that our Georgian colleagues accuse South Ossetia of money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and discrimination against Georgian minorities, including bans on their studying their mother language. To be honest, I didn't expect that within this forum such ludicrous allegations would be made. I don't know whether our opponents realize that in South Ossetia the bank system is in no way connected to the Georgian banking system. Georgian currency is not used in our republic. As a person involved in finance to some extent, I don't understand how in such circumstances money can possibly be laundered. Drug trafficking. Drugs don't simply walk around. As far as I understand, they are carried or transported. So you decide, dear colleagues, whether the Georgian-Ossetian border is closed off and people are deprived of their freedom of movement, or whether it is so open that people can easily transport drugs across it. You are contradicting yourselves. Can you name the surname of a single citizen of South Ossetia who was arrested in Georgia for drug trafficking over the last year? Can you name a single citizen of Georgia for whom money was paid? Where are the facts underpinning human trafficking? You can't simply make allegations. Now on discrimination on grounds of ethnicity. You claimed that people of Georgian nationality do not have the opportunity to study in their own language in South Ossetia. Allow me to give you some figures. In South Ossetia, there are around 50 schools, 53 to be more precise. We are a small republic. 7 out of them are Georgian schools. That represents about 14% of all such institutions. That means and that applies for about 10% of our citizens of Georgian nationality. In terms of the number of schools, ethnic Georgians are more privileged in South Ossetia than South Ossetians themselves. Children use textbooks printed in Georgia. And teachers in Georgian schools in South Ossetia are better off because they are paid both in Georgia and from the South Ossetian budget. Now let's talk about Georgia. Out of more than the 120,000 Ossetians living in Georgia at the start of the 90s, today, according to the census, there remain 36,000. That is to say that for 36,000 Ossetians in Georgia, there is not a single South Ossetian school. Not a single one. All Ossetian schools in Georgia were closed. In South Ossetia, there are 7 Georgian schools. In Georgia, there are no Ossetian ones. So who is deprived of the opportunity to study in their mother tongue? Georgians in South Ossetia or South Ossetians in Georgia? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for these comments. In reaction to previous intervention from organization in Georgia. I would now like to invite the Gaboy Minority Organization for Europe and North Europe, and next will be delegation for Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm here representing the Gaboy Minority Organization for Europe and North America. I would obviously request if I can pass this. I will hand it in to the documentation department. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we will make sure this is being received by the documentation center. And now the contribution from Azerbaijan, and will be followed by the Institute for Religious Freedom.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Etubar Najafov, Head Advisor of the State Consular Service of the Azerbaijan Republic for Multiculturalism, Interethnic and Religious Affairs. In contemporary world, especially when we are witnessing crisis of migration issue, the policy of multiculturalism faces serious challenges. Many states, including Western states, consider this policy as ineffective and as a cause of their socio-economic problems. In such a situation, number of states which still follow the principles of multiculturalism in regulating diversity, ethnic, religious, racial diversity, the number of such kind of states are being decreased. Azerbaijan is one of these states. Azerbaijan considers multiculturalism as a policy which, in the real situation, is the best policy for regulating these diversities. As a clear evidence of Azerbaijan's adherence to this policy, I'd like to tell you about the activity of the service I am presenting here. This service was established very recently, about a year and a half ago, but for that period it did a great job in terms of promoting the policy of multiculturalism. The organization in its activity works with Baku International Multiculturalism Center. As a clear evidence of this policy, I would like just to give you some projects which are being done presently by the service with the Baku International Multiculturalism Center. The list of these projects is very huge, and due to limit of time, I will bring to your attention only some of them. The first project, Traces of the History in Religious Monuments. The project aims to study Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and other religious monuments in the territory of Azerbaijan. The significance of this project is that it gives a deep knowledge of the history, clarifies some arguable issues related to it. And one of the most important projects is related to the teaching of the course Azerbaijani Multiculturalism in foreign state universities. Azerbaijan experience in the field of multiculturalism is being studied in Western universities. In spring 2015, 7 foreign universities agreed to include this course into their curriculum. And it shows that Azerbaijani experience deserves very great interest, not only in the country, but also abroad. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for sharing this contribution and particular features of your project, and we'll welcome full-fledged information on that through the documentation center as well. Let me invite and give the floor to the Institute for Religious Freedom, and next in line will be Emisko.
Dear Madam Moderator, dear participants, I represent the Institute for Religious Freedom NGO based in Ukraine, and I would like to speak more detail about religious situation in the Donbas region, which is a territory of the war conflict in the eastern Ukraine under Russian aggression. And I would like to speak in Russian language to demonstrate that Russian speakers in Ukraine are not discriminated and persecuted.
As in Crimea and in the rest of Ukraine, it was the beginning of Russian aggression, including in Donbas. We have noted respect for different kinds of traditions, religions, cultures, languages, but when holders of Russian arms entered the Ukrainian lands, we immediately saw that there was a torture and a murder of civilians, and an example of this is the situation of the events in Slaviansk in the Donetsk region last year, when there were 4 Ukrainian soldiers tortured and killed. Now, up to the present time, we see continued confiscation of churches and other horrendous crimes that are hate crimes and that are supported by the separatists which have Russian arms in their hands. And despite these examples, the civilians in Donbas remain hostages to the Russian terrorist forces. They are subject to shootings as well as to trampling of their religious rights. Now, in the summer of 2014, We note that currently there are crimes committed on bases of religious discrimination against persons in the Donbass, despite a slight improvement in 2014. In the Luhansk Oblast, there is a representative of a religious community who has disappeared. All that we know is that representatives of the so-called Ministry of State Security of the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic were involved in this disappearance of a religious representative in the area. And as a consequence of Russian aggression, hate crimes continue in Donbass. We have a few recommendations. First and foremost, the situation in Donbass requires an independent monitoring of human rights on the part of NGOs, as well as special attention and special monitoring mission of the OSCE. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will welcome the further recommendations to be submitted if you wish, the Documentation Center. Thank you for this contribution. Now I give the floor to EMISCO, the European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion, to be followed by the Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, Madame Gaspard. It's nice to see a dedicated person like yourself chairing this session. I represent EMISCO, European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion. The issue of hate crime against ethnic and religious minorities in Europe and OSCE states is not decreasing but increasing, especially against Muslim communities. Muslim women with and without hijab are special targets. EMISCO appreciates and cooperates with ODHIR on the issue of hate crime against Muslim communities. Madame Gaspard has asked for objective criticism of OSCE, so I'm going to give it to her. First, ODHIR, OSCE should empower NGOs to build their capacity. Second, there is an increasing need for data collection, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Third, training of journalists relating to their stereotyping of Muslim communities and Islam with harmful and ignorant reporting must be checked. Fourth, linking of hate speech to hate crime is very important. Many racist organizations, politicians, and academics in Europe use very anti-Islam rhetoric on a daily basis under the banner of freedom of speech. And a few minutes before, we also heard some NGOs who are very far right and who wants to have this freedom of speech for everything. Finally, EMISCO supports the idea of an OSCE ministerial decision on Islamophobia. Hopefully, this draft would be soon approved. OSCE member states have good intention. Now is the time to put the ideas into practice so that the second largest religion in the world and in Europe and its followers are protected in line with other religions. Since I have little time left, so I have few more remarks. First, I would like to remind OSCE member states and its public that Muslims are an integral part of Europe and have been since the 8th century and have not dropped from Mars yesterday as aliens, as some populist politicians would like us to believe. At 1 o'clock in room 1, EMISCO has a side event regarding hate crime against Muslims and how to deal with that in practical sense. Please do come and share the discussion with your good remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution and for being concrete with a set of recommendations, which will be considered in the follow-up of this important session. I will now give the floor to the Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights, to be followed by the Center for Public Debate.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I would like to draw attention to the fact that since last year, there has been systematic discrimination by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and other religious organizations. I'm talking firstly about hate speech in the media and by social activists and the Ukrainian parties, which the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is presented as a fifth column and an internal enemy, and they hide arms in their premises. But none of these allegations have been confirmed. In addition to the persecution by the Ukrainian security forces, there have been a number of events when there were raids, people had to flee abroad, and we're talking about dozens of people who represented the religious institutions. There has been systematic discrimination of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church by the authorities. Last year, the Kiev Parliament imposed property taxes on these religious organizations. Also, civil servants, high officials, have initiated a number of claims asking for this situation to be maintained. There have been several cultural buildings that have been seized by the Orthodox Church. Some of this has happened by force. Recently, there was one such seizure. It was seized by the militia, by the MVD, and there were 15 people who suffered, and human rights were breached. These actions inspired further repression against members of the clergy. There have been at least 8 cases of churches being shot at in the Luhansk and Donetsk areas by the Ukrainian army. Cultural buildings have at times been completely destroyed, and priests, amongst other people, have been killed. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the Donetsk and Luhansk area has seen priests being abducted. There has also been abuse against them, and they have been subjected to torture, and they have been taken hostage. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. I will now invite the Center for Public Debate to take the floor, and next will be Act for America 5280 Coalition.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Center for Public Debate is an organization set up by the Turkish diaspora in the Netherlands. We will submit our extended paper and the recommendation, but I just want to highlight a few points today. Although I'll talk about hate crimes against Muslims, the comments are equally valid for any other group subjected to hate crimes. And we believe that time has come to walk the talk. There's a lot of talk on this and no action. And it was talked about collecting data, which is very important, but collecting any data has some very critical prerequisites. So we ask, and the member states should develop standard procedures for law enforcement agencies on identifying and reporting hate crimes, because there are a lot of variations, and usually law enforcement agencies tend to disqualify hate crimes against Muslims and report them as ordinary offenses. We need clear and consistent training of law enforcement agencies in all European countries with significant number of Muslims to identify and recognize hate crimes quickly and adequately, because we have many variations that should be eliminated. Otherwise, any activities based on incomplete and inaccurate data will not produce any results. And we should also let them know that it should be the judges who are deciding in the end and not the police up front. We would like to ask member states to clarify and elaborate their legislation dealing with discrimination and hate crimes with specific emphasis on public figures like politicians and leading civil servants because they are role models for the society and they should not be protected by free speech excuses when they incite hatred against Muslims and any other groups because of their position. And we do not want our children and grandchildren to inherit hatred. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this contribution, including reminding that it's important to walk the talk. And we'll welcome your full-fledged contribution and recommendations through the Documentation Center. I will now invite, we have another 3 or 4 contributions. Before passing on the floor to the next one, let me also remind you that before we come to the end of this session, we'll soon give the delegations the opportunity to exercise the right of reply. I understand we have already a number of requests, but please indicate to us and back here if other delegations wish to exercise this right when we'll come to that point soon. So I will now give the floor to Act for America, 5,280 Coalition, and that will be followed by the European Association of Jehovah's Christians Witnesses in Belgium. Can I have your microphone for the interpreters, please?
Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. By the OSCE's own definition, the act of a hate crime must be a crime under the criminal code of the legal jurisdiction in which it is committed. But what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is the tendency to label hurt feelings and so-called insult as hate crimes. But in the rough and tumble politics of free societies, there is no right or guarantee to be hurt feelings free or insult free. Too often, it is special interest groups or incumbent politicians who label the remarks of their opposition as hate speech and discrimination, only in an effort to silence them. The Act for America 5280 Coalition would like to remind the member states that free discussion is an integral part of the political process and must be preserved from any and all restrictions, no matter how well-intentioned. The Act for America 5280 Coalition would also like to remind member states that no group, especially religious groups that venture onto the political stage, are immune from nor deserve a free pass from criticism or critical examination. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I will now invite the European Association of Jehovah's Christians Witnesses in Belgium, and next will be ICLA.
Thank you. We have 2 recommendations for the consideration of Turkey. First, we ask that Turkey apply the existing zoning law in a non-discriminatory manner and permit religious minorities like Jehovah's Witnesses to build and own places of worship. And secondly, to stop prosecuting conscientious objectors to military service and implement the binding decisions of the European Court of Human Rights and the United Nations Human Rights Committee. In Turkey, currently, there are 55 conscientious objectors who are Jehovah's Witnesses and facing criminal prosecution. Fortunately, none are imprisoned, but they are all facing very serious fines and the prospect of imprisonment. The European Court of Human Rights has already decided 3 cases against Turkey on this very issue, as has the United Nations Human Rights Committee decided 1 case on this issue. Yet, in what must be considered religious discrimination, Turkey has targeted 3 of Jehovah's Witnesses whose cases were already decided by the European Court for repeat prosecution. Secondly, regarding houses of worship, in 2003, Turkey modified its law on zoning to comply with European standards and non-discrimination, specifically to provide non-Muslim religious minorities with the right to build and own places of worship. In practice, this amendment has not been implemented. Jehovah's Witnesses have made 91 requests in 29 municipalities, and they have all been refused. In the entire country, not even one application has been granted. The prospects, of course, are very serious because where Jehovah's Witnesses meet for worship, they can face prosecution because the authorities don't grant registration. So in summary, both issues are relatively easy to solve, we submit. First of all, apply the existing law on zoning in a non-discriminatory manner. And secondly, apply the binding decisions of the European Court and the Human Rights Committee and stop prosecuting conscientious objectors. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing these very specific recommendations. We have two more requests on the list, so I will now invite ICLA, the International Civil Liberties Alliance, and next and final will be the International Human Rights Movement, World Without Nazism, if back in the room.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Moderator, thank you. Before I continue, please let me comment on a previous speaker, as we've just seen the mere accusation of Islamophobia from some groups is designed to establish guilt in the minds of a pliant audience by its mere utterance. And you do understand that, don't you? Nonetheless, to continue, undeniably there has recently been an increase in hate crimes in the OSCE region. For example, in Germany there have been many appalling arson attacks on refugee reception centres suspected to have been committed by neo-Nazis. It should be noted that this is happening in spite of Germany having some of the tightest laws against hate speech in the OSCE regions. There are laws against Holocaust denial. The organisation Die Freiheit in Munich is being monitored due to its criticism of Islam. There are appeals for Facebook to delete supposed hate speech. Could it be that such laws, in fact, have little effect on haters intending to be violent? However, there is another source of hate crimes which is, it seems, not being addressed. During the current refugee crisis in Europe, with over 1 million refugees arriving this year alone, mainly from African and Asian countries, pitched battles have regularly broken out between groups of migrants. From the Greek island of Lesbos to Croatia to German refugee reception centres, amongst other places, we have seen Syrian versus Afghan, Iraqi versus Afghan, Albanian versus Palestinian battles, often involving hundreds, if not thousands, of asylum seekers, the latest being in Leipzig and in Calden, Germany. The dire position of women in refugee accommodation at risk of rape and abuse has also been noticed in a report given in Parliament in Hessen in August. What is this if not an expression of hatred and hate crimes? As a result, German authorities have considered housing migrants separately according to their ethnicity and religion. Is this a tacit acknowledgement that the forced placement of different ethnicities and groups together can in fact lead to friction? In addition, there is the very real possibility of jihadist fighters being imported along with other migrants. After all, if they have no documents or forged ones, is there any way of knowing who they are? With all these developments, European citizens are concerned about hatred and whether Europe is not in fact currently importing hate in high doses. We have seen European countries, in particular Germany, declare that they can take very high numbers of refugees, but then following this up by introducing border controls inside the Schengen zone. Then it turns out that there are not enough places to house the migrants. As a solution, native Germans are being expelled from apartments they have rented for many years, such as in Nijheim, Ludwigshafen and other towns and cities. What can this situation create for the long run except hate and radicalization in both the migrant and native communities? And just to conclude, the ICLA would like to recommend a decisive effort to control borders and stop illegal crossing of borders by the use of Europe's navies and coast guard patrols. that the need to protect freedom of speech is recognized, especially in the debates on migration and the promotion of resettling refugees in regions which are culturally similar to their homelands, which would result in the least likelihood of new tensions being created. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. And last on the list, I will now pass on the floor to the international human rights movement, World Without Nazism, who I understand is now back with us in the room. That might not be the case. They had requested a speaking time earlier, we're not there. So I understand that one will not be used, therefore. So, well, thank you very much to all of you for a very rich sharing of experience, rich diversity of inputs, contributions, experience in terms of experience, good practices that you have, but also a number of challenges. And I'm quite pleased to see that a number of recommendations of different sorts have been shared around the table. Before we close this part of the session to move to the right of reply by the delegations, I will in a moment like to just give the floor and an opportunity for comments to our speaker and introducer. From my side, I heard a lot of, as I said, rich diversity of inputs. Also underlining the fact that hate speech, hate crime, and discrimination affect a very wide range of groups, as we heard from different contributions, a lot of reference to different racial and ethnic groups, also religious groups, many references to Islamophobia in particular, and LGBTI communities. The importance among the recommendations heard of a comprehensive, fair and just system, and the importance of strong legislation and mainly effective enforcement mechanisms. Reinforcing the legislation specifically on hate crime, recognizing particularly the discriminatory nature and an aggravating circumstance of discrimination in the case of hate crime, and the importance of sanctions. Building capacity, which as we know is among some of the key priorities of the OSCE work and commitment. Importance of data collection was also mentioned on numbers of occasions. And the need for effective support and strategy to indeed walk the talk and ensure impact for people. Last and interesting reference was also the fact that we indeed address the important priority of hate speech, hate crime, but a reminder that we should progress this work in a context where we remember the core values of equality, tolerance, and indeed freedom of thought, speech, and expression. So I would like to give a final opportunity for comments to our introducer and presenter, Hilary O'Shelton, before moving to the rights of response by the delegation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And I do want to thank, again, the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Office on Democratic Institutions and Human Rights for inviting me to participate in this working session. The working session that you've all been so responsive to, entitled Combating Hate Crimes and Ensuring Effective Protection Against Discrimination. I must tell you, I've been deeply flattered and honored to have the opportunity to listen to each and every one of you talk about the challenges of hate crimes in your society. I would also be remiss if I did not thank my own delegation from the United States of America for its fantastic contributions along these lines. It is important to recognize that having a federal government actually talk about the issues of hate crimes in our country, one of the things that was left out is the extraordinary response that came from our government at the highest level. Even the President of the United States, Barack Obama, responded to those awful incidents of hate crimes, showing in many ways how decisive a response should be to these kind of cases at the very highest level. Oftentimes we let these things go with just a brush off, and I've seen many politicians, even in my own country, do those things. But the quick response in being the perpetrator to justice, and the quick response by our president in denouncing these issues, and every entity of our government doing these things as well, in my opinion, is a great demonstration of how things should be done, not only there, but perhaps in other places. I'd also say, as controversial as this might sound, I want to thank our friends from the Russian Federation for reminding us of the challenges of even policing in our society. They are absolutely right when they raise issues of the Michael Brown case. I would also mention that in that Michael Brown case, two issues are very, very important. If you get a chance, please go online and get a chance to listen to the interview of Dan Wilson, the police officer that killed Michael Brown, the 18-year-old unarmed, college-bound young African-American man. Indeed, what you'll hear is a description that came from a law enforcement official in our society that actually described Michael Brown in very inhumane terms. That is, he described his actions as being very animalistic. He described the gaze on his face as being one that was much like a killer shark than a human being, in many ways giving him just the opportunity he needed and the justification with himself and otherwise to kill this unarmed young man. So I'm delighted that he raised those issues in those terms. And going back to my government again, I would thank the federal government of the United States for the very insightful review that was done on that case. Our Department of Justice not only analyzed what happened in that incident, but also analyzed the challenges and problems in the community of Ferguson, Missouri, that actually led very well to those cases. The lack of democratization that formed a government structure that had such little regard for racial and ethnic minorities is very much at the bottom of this. And again, I thank the Justice Department under the leadership of Loretta Lynch and at that time Eric Holder for that great response. But as we talk about these issues, one of the things that I have to say, perhaps I did not do very well in my role as an introductor, but I would hope that perhaps at another session we can move from hate crimes to the issues of effective protection against discrimination. Many of the issues that were missing, quite frankly, in this discussion were the issues of policing overall. The need for diversity and screening along those lines as we think about solutions, actually the oversight and power that must be given to communities that are policed by those that sometimes overuse that authority in a most barbaric way. Let's talk about issues of sentencing disparities as we look at racial and ethnic minorities and injustice that's too often done by our justice systems. But again, I give a commendation to our federal government because even Eric Holder, our former Attorney General, actually testified before the U.S. Sentencing Commission on the real problems with mandatory minimum sentences and its racial and ethnic disparity in our country and took those issues on. I hope we can talk about those kind of issues well as groups like this begin to and continue to gather. As we talk about disparities and issues of employment discrimination, there's no discussion about how race and ethnicity too often play into the hands of those that would discriminate and not allow one to have a job or relegate them to very low positions in our society. And of course, directly tied to that is issues of education access, not only at the pre-K through 12th grade level, but for those that go beyond on to higher education and the lack of access too often because of one's race, gender, ethnicity, or religion. As we begin to move along those lines, I hope we can have some discussion as we move to address the disparities and the issues of racial and ethnic disparities in home ownership that is being able to develop wealth, as we see too often the relegations of wealth and issues of that matter being given only to those that are the controlling interest in the country or a community. Beyond that, I hope we can also talk about the disparities, again, as some racial and ethnic minority disparities in access to comprehensive health care. What we see is a multi-tiered system in which those who are considered to be the leading authorities in the countries getting access to a full array of health care. But those everyday people, including immigrants that come into our country, are those racial, ethnic, religious, or other minorities actually being relegated again to something much, much less. We started this and began this, and I was so also delighted as we went around the table, and the issue of being able to collect data is one that carried the day. But there was no data or very little data at all mentioned in many of these other areas, which I think is actually crucial if it is equality that we seek in all of our countries. Again, I thank you. I was very flattered to have this opportunity to be here, and perhaps when we get a chance to talk about these other issues, maybe you'll invite me back. Thank you so much.
Thank you indeed, and I'm glad you had this opportunity for sharing your reactions to some of the comments, and in particular, it's very interesting for you, your comment to remember us to put back the protection from discrimination at the center of work on combating hate crime is a very important way forward. Before passing on the floor to the rights of reply, I was asked to give a few minutes and contribution to the OSCE chairmanship, and I would like to announce already in advance that we have 12 requests for rights to reply, so the times allocated will be 1.5 minutes, just so that you are prepared for that.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as short as possible. Simply, Serbian chairmanship would like to use this opportunity to invite participating states for the special event that is going to be organized on 17th of November this year. That actually would be Reinforced Human Dimension Committee meeting on hate crimes. This idea of having reinforced Human Dimension Committee meeting on hate crime was announced last year at the HDM. We thought that we need more thorough discussion on the follow-up and findings from the ODIHR annual report on hate crime. Swiss and Serbian chairmanships are trying to develop a culture of self-evaluation. So this event is supposed to be actually voluntary reporting of participating states on the findings of the report, of the ODIHR's report. We would appreciate very much if in this voluntary reporting participating states concentrate on prevention measures that they are applying, but also on the court cases and give us actually information at that meeting on sentenced hate crime cases, but also prosecuted cases. It will be also good to hear at this meeting the best practices from the participating states on internal coordination mechanisms, because some of participating states have these mechanisms. Having in this in mind and the concept of this reinforced human dimension committee meeting, we would appreciate very much if you send experts from the capitals. It would be very good to have, apart from national points of contact on hate crime, also experts from ministries of justice, but also representatives of judiciary and prosecutors. This event will be, as it is envisaged, compatible with the event organized by ODIHR on the next two following days, on 18 and 19 of November. This agenda was already distributed to delegations, and also at the same period we will have in parallel workshop of civil society on the issue of hate crime. So it will be sort of week relating to hate crime, because obviously having in mind the great number of interventions these days at this HDM on hate crime, but also having in mind how discussions went on previous years, we thought that we need to attach more attention to this very topical issue in Vienna as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for putting that in the context, in the important context of the work of ODIHR and OSCE and some of the steps ahead. Now, I will indeed close this part of the session to move and to open the floor to allow delegations of participating states to exercise their right of reply, as has been requested on the list. As I said, with 12 requests and a limited maximum time of 1.5 minutes, which will bring us precisely to 1 p.m. So, without further ado, I will give the floor to the delegation of Cyprus, and next will be the UK.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I exercise the right of reply in response to some comments made by an Azerbaijani organization. Firstly, I would like to underline that especially this meeting is not a platform for channeling political propaganda, political state separatism, or historical revisionism disguised as claims of human rights violations. Second, I want to stress that the Republic of Cyprus fully safeguards the rights of all of its citizens, Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Armenians, Maronites, and Latins. Therefore, the Turkish Cypriots are entitled to all the rights enjoyed by all Cypriot citizens, including the issuance of passports by which they can travel freely across EU and worldwide. Finally, we do hope that the current momentum created by the election of the new Turkish Cypriot leader will lead the soonest possible to the reunification of our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I now pass on the floor to the UK, to be followed by the Holy See.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The UK would like to respond in relation to the issues raised by the representative of the Core Issues Trust. The UK government is committed to the safeguarding freedom of religion, of free speech, and defending the valuable role of faith in public life. We fully support people's right to conduct their lives in accordance with their faith, insofar as this does not unlawfully interfere with the rights of others. However, it is important to strike a fair balance between religious freedom of expression and the rights of, for example, lesbian, gay and bisexual people not to be discriminated against. The UK government believes the Equality Act of 2010 strikes the right balance between the rights of people to manifest their religion or belief and the rights of others not to be discriminated against or harassed due to their protected characteristics such as sexual orientation. We are confident the balance struck in the Equality Act is the correct one, and we have no plans, therefore, to change the law. Also, in relation to the statement from the representative of Jawab, the criminal justice agencies in the UK have a clear definition of anti-Muslim hate crime rather than Islamophobia, and we work closely with civil society organisations like Talmama to improve the reporting of these unacceptable crimes. We'd be happy to meet with Jawab to discuss how we can work together to improve understanding further in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for this reaction. Now I will give the word to Holy See, to be followed by Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We are discussing extremely important topic, combating hate crimes and ensuring effective protection against discrimination. However, as it is stated in the annotated agenda for this meeting, the aim of this session is to review the implementation of OSCE commitments related to the prevention of and response to discrimination and hate crimes by examining challenges, good practices, and lessons learned in this area. We would like to recall that the definition of hate crime has never been agreed by all 57 OSCE participating states. The only consensus document of the OSCE with a list of bias motives is Ministerial Council Decision 12 of 2004 that stated, the participating states commit to consider enacting or strengthening, where appropriate, legislation that prohibits discrimination based on or incitement to hate crimes motivated by race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other statutes. OSCE participating states have limited the scope of the OSCE interest in the area of tolerance and non-discrimination to those topics that could threaten the security of the OSCE region. Expansion of OSCE commitments beyond these priority areas dilutes OSCE tolerance program and projects and duplicates activities of other organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of the aim of the session indeed and some of the aspect of implementation of OSCE commitments in this regard. I would like to pass on the floor to Georgia, and next will be Greece.
No.
Can you please turn on? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In exercising my right of reply, I just wanted to very briefly comment the following. First, it is quite difficult for us to relate the remarks of the Ossetian NGO Sandizan to today's topic of discussion. We don't really see how this relates to hate crimes. We certainly had enough opportunity to discuss this issue yesterday, the fundamental rights, including the right to education. Also, it is rather ironic for us to be accused of obstructing to the work of international organizations in Georgia's occupied regions. We simply reject these accusations. On the contrary, Georgia has been for years advocating and calling on, and primarily the Russian Federation, to allow the international organizations, including to allow the access of international organizations, including the UMM, the OSCE, and its institutions, into the occupied territories. Their access would allow the monitoring of the situation on the ground. However, precisely due to Russia's unconstructive position, the international organizations, namely the UMM, is not being allowed access into Georgia's regions, despite their very clear mandate to do so. And in the end, I would just like to remind distinguished delegations that the side event organized by Georgia today, it will be held at 6:30 instead of 6. So would very much appreciate everyone's attendance. Thank you.
Thank you for this contribution and information. Now I will pass on the floor to Greece, followed by delegation of Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to reply to the cases brought forward by the Organization of Muslim Citizens from Western Thrace. Greece reiterates its steadfast commitment to the global fight against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Same principles and goals apply with reference to the protection and full respect for rights of Greek citizens, members of the Muslim minority in Thrace. Greece remains unreservedly committed to safeguarding all human rights and individual freedoms for every individual residing in its territory, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or race. To achieve this, all necessary measures are in place to address all manifestations of racist and discrimination-based ideologies. A good example is the new anti-racist law introduced in 2014, which brings important improvements in the field of criminalizing every racist or xenophobic behavior perpetrated due to the religion, among other attributes of the victim. Besides the legal framework against racism and discrimination, there are also strong and credible institutions in the fight against racist behavior, such as the Ombudsman and the National Commission for Human Rights. Finally, the creation of public prosecutor for racism issues operating in Athens, Thessaloniki, as well as the operation of special units of the police to assist victims of racist violence, and other important reforms to effectively address allegations of police violence have particularly contributed in confronting all forms of racism and xenophobia in an inclusive and effective manner. Therefore, all cases mentioned can and will be investigated. Thank you very much, Madam, for your attention.
Thank you. Next is the delegation of Kyrgyzstan, to be followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The delegation of the Kyrgyz Republic would like to use its right to reply in connection with the statements made by the organization Voice of Freedom. As was noted by the representative of the Holy See, the topic today, that is hate crimes, is a special legal description of crimes against persons that are committed by people on the basis of hatred towards the nationality, ethnic identification, religion, or sexual orientation of another person. The use by the foundation that spoke of the category of persons who are drug addicts as being subject to hate crime seems to me to be a kind of new interpretation. Now, we recognize the importance of the issues that have been brought forward, and we'd like to draw attention to the fact that in Kyrgyzstan there is much discussion of these issues, and you will find that it is, we believe, considering the discussion of such issues at an international forum on hate crime seems to us to be a misuse of resources. I repeat, the issue is discussed at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you for this response. I now pass on the floor to the delegation of France, to be followed by the USA.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to echo what the European Union said, and I'd like to add some elements in my national capacity. France is a country characterized by a great diversity of religion and by a great number of citizens who do not believe in any particular religion. This means that we can live together in full respect of the freedom of religion or belief of each individual. It means we must combat all forms of religious fundamentalism, whatever their origin. Combating racism and anti-Semitism is a national priority. It was stipulated as such by the President of the Republic, and it is the object of a new interministerial plan as of April 2015. This plan for combating racism and anti-Semitism involves all ministries as well as local authorities and civil society. It is based on 4 key pillars: education, transmitting the Republic's values, and fighting against hate crimes, especially online. Special efforts are deployed to address the roots of prejudice, because ignorance is often the underlying cause. Education and awareness raising is the best defense against hate speech. €100 million over 3 years will be allocated to efforts to combat these problems, and we will continue to foster greater citizenship. Allow me to finish my statement, and I have finished my statement, and I will give you a copy to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I remind you, indeed, this is now the moment for time to reply, but we welcome any further contribution that should have taken place earlier through the Documentation Center or in the course of the next session. I will now give the floor to the delegation from the USA, to be followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The right of reply is in response to comments made this morning by the Russian Federation. First, the United States seeks to promote equality and overcome discrimination. The recent cases in which African Americans died during encounters with police have been met with efforts to address racial disparities and racial bias in the U.S. criminal justice system. The U.S. Department of Justice investigates and prosecutes police wrongdoing, assists police departments in training efforts to reduce explicit and implicit racial bias, to de-escalate conflicts, to provide community engagement grants to police departments, and to coordinate dialogue and other efforts between communities, human rights defenders, and government officials. Second, while my nation still has a long way to go in combating hate crime and intolerance, we have made major progress. We have, sitting in the Oval Office, an African-American president. We have made great advances in LGBTI rights. And sitting in this chair at the delegation for HDM, I stand as a representative of the so-called opposition political party in the United States. I greatly wish I were having this exchange with my friend Boris Nemtsov instead of mourning his brutal assassination 7 months ago. Third, the OSCE is based on the concept of collective security, including human rights. All participating states have categorically and irrevocably declared that the commitments undertaken in the field of the human dimension are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states and do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the states concerned. Let me remind my Russian colleague that the desire to live free of repression and corruption, to have one's dignity and human rights respected, is universal. Ukrainians acted on this desire nearly 2 years ago. I dare say this desire exists in Russia too. Thank you.
Thank you for this response. I now give the floor to Belgium, and next will be the delegation of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Belgium would like to use its right to reply to respond to the statement made by the Collective Against Islamophobia in Belgium, CCIB. Belgium has made many efforts over the last few years to fight against discrimination and hate crimes. And we have made these efforts regardless of the targeted group. We have targeted both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism because outrage cannot be selective here. I would like to mention the joint circular issued by the Minister for Justice, the Home Affairs Minister, and the College of Public Prosecutors, dating back to 2013. This aimed to foster better prosecution of these offences throughout the country. This circular letter also emphasised the need to train the actors on the ground, raise awareness about legislation, and through practical examples as required or requested by the CCIB. Regarding the issue of sacrifices, which is also brought up by CCIB, Belgium recognises the right to animal welfare. In such circumstances, ritual slaughters can only be carried out in slaughterhouses and only by certified sacrifices. It is therefore done in standing slaughterhouses, and the relevant authorities are aiming to boost the capacities of these institutions. We are, of course, open to further consultation in a constructive manner with the CCIB. Thank you. Thank you for that response. I will now give the floor to the delegation from Turkey.
The Russian Federation.
Merci bien, Madame la Moderatrice.
Thank you, Madam Moderator.
A couple of comments which are prompting me to exercise my right of reply. First, on Cyprus, the representative of the Greek Cypriot administration gave us a sort of sunny, nice, unified account of the situation on the island of Cyprus. But the reality on the island is quite distinct from that. There exists a Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and this republic and its citizens are being subjected to a multitude of restrictions that are devoid of legal and legitimate basis. In other words, the realities on the island are different. The island is not currently unified, and the ongoing negotiations between the two communities to arrive at a solution constitute the ultimate testament to this fact. Second, there were some allegations regarding discrimination against conscientious objectors on the basis of religious belief. I do not see how this has been substantiated. Some may belong to one religious group, others may adhere to another faith. Well, this is just the natural state of things. If you react to conscientious objection, that's one thing, but discrimination on the basis of religious belief, that's another. Finally, on the issue raised about places of worship, licenses not being granted by municipalities, you may agree or disagree with those decisions. I would like to simply remind all here that there's always the possibility of legal recourse to these administrative decisions, and such recourse may be taken all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this reply, and I will end this list with the next response from the Russian Federation, to be followed by delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, first of all, in my right of reply, I would like to thank the distinguished introducer, Mr. Hilary Shelton, for his words of thankness to the Russian delegation for drawing an attention to the existing problems in the United States in their discussing area. Unfortunately, at the given time limit, did not allow me to go into the specific cases in details, so I just wanted to present the basic general information. But this approach, this positive approach, which will be beneficial for both sides, I deeply believe is very, very, as I said before, positive. I will keep going on in Russian.
We'd like once again draw attention to the irresponsible statements by the delegation of Ukraine using the word occupation, which is unfounded and not based on facts. This word demonstrates that the Ukrainian authorities cannot observe basic respect for human rights and are providing a bad example for all of Ukraine. With respect to other statements made by the Ukrainian delegation about Russian citizens and crimes, it is very clear and has been raised many times in the OSCE. This is outside the theme of our discussion. With respect to the U.S. allegations about the Russian Federation, I'd like to draw the attention of listeners to the decision of the Constitutional Court of Russia, which prohibits hate crimes in the territory of the Russian Federation. I'd also like to condemn the propaganda
pretensions addressed to the Russian Federation during their current session because of their absurdness or absence of any relation to the topic of current discussion. I'll leave them without the comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for this. We just need to be respecting the time, also thinking of our interpreters, given we have gone past the time. So to finish, I will give the word in the last reply to the delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to respond to the statement made by Russia, and I would like to say that they have made unfounded allegations as regards the harassment of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. This does not correspond to reality at all. On the contrary, most incidents in Ukraine were provoked by Russian secret services and aimed against people who did not support the Russian actions against the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And this was done regardless of the language they spoke or the faith they followed. This has acquired a lot of resonance at the social level, and there has been a lot of distorted information provided by the Russian mass media, which almost are always at the heart of events, and they tend to even guess where events are going to take place before they actually have taken place. We would like to underscore that Russia uses spurious propaganda regarding the annexation of Crimea and the events in the Donbass area. The occupation by the Russian Federation is a clear fact, and Crimea will always be part of Ukraine, and Ukraine does all it can to uphold the rights of citizens of its country, wherever they might be. As regards the allegations made against Ukraine about attacks against Orthodox churches, I would like to say that this is completely false and such events have not taken place. In 2015, representatives of the Russian Defense Services attacked a church, and there have been many cases of religious institutions coming under fire in the eastern Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this final response for this session. And without further ado, because we have gone a little bit over time, I'd like to first give our warm thanks to our speaker and introducer, Hilary Hushelton, who traveled a long way to be with us today, and mainly to thank all of you, all participants and the audience this morning for a very rich range of inputs and contributions, as well as I said, express our gratitude to the interpreters for their works in supporting our discussions this morning. We invite you to take part in the next session this afternoon at 3 p.m., continuing on the topic of combating hate crimes and ensuring effective protection against discrimination, and in between side events according to the program that can be consulted outside the meeting room. I would just like to invite you to leave your headsets, headphones in the room, and many thanks indeed for this working session.